You're watching BCTV. We're all about Brantford. You're watching BCTV, Brantford Government Television, a service of Brantford Community Television. This program is brought to you in part through the support of the town of Brantford.
Good evening. My name is Peter Basserman, and I'm chairman in the Wetland Commission. I'll now open a regular monthly April 20. It is now 7:05. This evening's meeting will be conducted as a virtual meeting using the Zoom software conferencing platform instead of the normal in-person format, being held in accordance with Connecticut's Executive Order 7B. Documents referenced during the meeting are available at the town hall or via the agency's webpage. To prepare for tonight's meeting, a special meeting of the commission was held on Tuesday, April 7th at 7 o'clock for the purpose of getting familiar with the Zoom software. Comments made by participants in that video conference have been incorporated into tonight's proceedings. As such, a few administrative details need to be addressed before commencing with the publicly filed agenda. First, to provide the public exposure to these proceedings, Brantford Community Television will be recording and broadcasting tonight's meeting. We are thankful for their participation, and customers of Comcast Cable Television can view the recording on the appropriate cable TV channel. Second, to allow for an accurate and complete record of the discussions, each time a statement or comment is made during tonight's meeting, the party speaking must announce his or her name before articulating such comment. This applies to any party wishing to participate. Third, once the meeting has begun, mute your microphone. This will prevent unwanted feedback from distorting communications. Fourth, to enhance the use of the Zoom software for our application tonight, we will be using the raise your hand feature. We will discourage the use of emojis, and all parties wishing to speak need to be recognized by the chair before proceeding. To speak, unmute your microphone. This is not intended to squelch participation, rather it's to provide some order in the communication exchanges. Jamie, are there any supplemental remarks you would like to share with tonight's participants regarding Executive Order 7B or your role as the host of this conference call or details associated with the Zoom application?
Sure, Peter. This is Jamie Frederick in the Wetland Agent. I'll just run through a couple of features. Anyone that's been added that is not a member of the commission or their staff has been muted. You can unmute yourself if a topic that, if the chairman has opened up the floor to something that you are going to be speaking on by clicking the button in the lower left corner. You can also start and stop your video by the button next to that on the right. And you can open up manage participants to see who's in the meeting. And if you open up that window in the lower right-hand corner, there's 3 dots. And if you click, if you click that, you'll find the option to raise your hand. There is also a chat feature. Please only use that if you have a question about your audio or video, or if you're trying it just to state that you have a comment or a question so that the chairman can address that. You also have the ability to toggle your screen view in the upper right corner between gallery and speaker view if you would like. And again, I ask that people do not use emojis or thumbs up, and keep all content related communications verbal, so that way people participating via phone also also are part of that communication. And then Peter, I think we're already on the same page about this, but when you do the roll call, just state all of the commissioners' full names so that we can see if they're present, please.
Commissioner Basserman, yes, I will do that. Let's see. Finally, let me ask all participants to recognize that this is the Commission's initial use of video conferencing, and your patience is appreciated in advance. I would also like to publicly recognize in the Wetland staff, Fredericks and McCarthy, for the extra effort that they put in terms of arranging for this meeting. I'll now take a roll call at a commission. When I announce your name, please reply with a present. Commissioner Begeman?
Present.
Commissioner Boda?
Present.
Commissioner Granalch? Absent. Commissioner Kraus? Absent. Commissioner Rose?
Present.
Commissioner Ross?
Present.
And Commissioner Sullivan?
Present.
Thank you. As this is Commissioner Begeman's first official regular meeting, I'd like to welcome you to the commission and ask that you share with the rest of us some background.
Sure, thank you. So I've lived in Brantford since 1994. I grew up in Hamden. I'm a nurse practitioner, and I work mainly in New Haven with teenagers. And I've been working with the Master Naturalist program that deep runs out of Goodwin Forest up in the northeast part of Connecticut for the last few years. They have a Master Naturalist 1 and 2 program, and I'm involved in that.
Thank you. Okay, so we have 6 commissioners present. They are all seated per regulations. 7 commissioners may vote on an issue, so we're good to go. We have a quorum. Is there any commissioner who must recuse themselves from tonight's activity? Okay.
Hey, Commissioner Ross here.
Yes.
On the 1151 West Main, I had a lot of catch-up work. While I did do a lot of the catch-up in terms of listening, I was unable to really get through all of the documents. So I understand that there's a quorum for deliberating on that, and knowing that that's the case, I'm going to bow out of those deliberations.
Thank you, Commissioner Ross. Yeah, I was going to note that when we got that item, but appreciate saving us some time. I will note for the record that each vote by the commissioner is an independent vote, and they're all of equal weight. Does staff have any changes to the agenda?
I do not.
David McCarthy, I do not.
Thank you. Commissioner Basserman, again, we now move on to the approval of the minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes distributed in advance via email. You should all have a copy. First of all, the minutes of March 12th, which was a regular meeting. Entertain any motions for approval at this point.
Commissioner Rose, motion to approve the March 12th regular meeting minutes.
And hopefully a second is out there.
Commissioner Boda, second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Do we have to do this individually now for the record, Jamie?
Jamie Frederick in the Wetland agent. I believe that would be a good idea, Peter. Yes.
Okay, so then I'll go in order on my screen in the order that they appear. Commissioner Rose?
Yes.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yes.
Commissioner Begeman?
Abstain.
Commissioner Ross?
Abstain.
Commissioner Boda?
Aye.
And I approve as well. Next up, March 17th, special meeting minutes. This is where we had the deliberation on Sycamore Way.
Commissioner Rose, motion to approve the March 17th meeting minutes for the special meeting.
Commissioner Boda, second.
Any further discussion? Again, in order, Commissioner Rose.
Aye.
Vote aye. Commissioner Sullivan.
Aye.
Commissioner Begeman.
Abstain.
Commissioner Ross.
Abstain.
Commissioner Boda.
Aye.
Commissioner Basserman, yay. Last up, minutes, April 7th, special meeting. Fresh in our memories. This was where we had a trial run of Zoom. Is there a motion to entertain those minutes?
Commissioner Rose, I make a motion to approve the April 7th special meeting minutes.
And is there a second?
Boda, second.
Way to go, Sue.
Get that intact.
3 for 3.
Any discussion? All in favor? Let's see. Commissioner Rose,
Aye.
Commissioner Sullivan,
Aye.
Commissioner Begeman.
Aye.
By the way, am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Commissioner Ross,
Aye.
Commissioner Boda,
Aye.
Commissioner Basserman, yes. Okay. We have first up on our agenda, application for receipt, inland wetland 200301, 58 East Industrial Road, construction of a new building and material storage area. Can you enlighten us a little bit, Jamie, on what we're doing here?
Sure. Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. This application is for receipt. The materials are available in the Dropbox link that's been provided. The applicant is looking to submit some additional materials and make some revisions based on initial review. So they're holding off on giving a presentation at this time, and the application is just being received.
Great.
One question I guess that maybe I would like to ask is, I don't think we've mailed out packets of this material. It's in the Dropbox. Would commissioners like to receive paper packets with this information?
Commissioner Rose, no.
Commissioner Basserman, no.
Commissioner Sullivan, no.
Commissioner Begeman, yes.
Commissioner Boda, maps only, please.
Commissioner Ross, no.
Anything else, Jamie?
This
This is Commissioner Basserman. Anything else?
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent, nothing else on that application.
Commissioner Boda, I have a question about the application for receipt. Is there, within that application, are they applying for fill in the wetland?
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. They are proposing a construction, what's the word I want to use? All the work is outside of the wetland, but the lower portion of the development is in the upland area, and there are some slopes and a lot of retaining walls involved in the project. So I definitely think it's something the commission needs to review, but there's no proposed direct wetland impact.
Commissioner Boda, I was inquiring because if there was a proposal fulfill, then we would be looking at a significant activity which could impact whether we have a requirement for a public hearing. So it doesn't sound like that's going to be an issue with this application.
Inland wetland agent Jamie Frederick. It doesn't flag to me as something that would require a public hearing. However, it's always up to the commission to decide. So as I stated, the materials are in the Dropbox, and we'll send out paper copies to the people that identified that like paper copies. I do anticipate the site plan will change. Just keep that in mind. And the public hearing, there's plenty of time to still decide to open a public hearing at a later time. So,
Commissioner Boda, this is Commissioner Rose. Just to your question, all of the work in the lower portion within the upland review area ends up being pervious gravel area of the site as well. So there's it's pretty innocuous what's going on in the lower portion of the property.
I can actually pull up the plan real quick for you if you want. Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. Let me try and share this real quick. All right, so there's a proposed building in the upper portion of the site. This is the end of East Industrial Road. You just looked at an application across the way to the south. And then they're proposing material storage in the eastern portion of the site. And this all slopes downhill, and the wetland is mostly off-site on the next property, which is 21 Sycamore Way. They're proposing the stormwater basin in this area. The limits of disturbance are here along this dotted line, and they're proposing to discharge the stormwater into the existing stormwater system, which outlets to the wetland.
Anything else, Commissioner Basserman, anything else? Okay, moving on. Application for receipt, inland wetland 200401, 367, 377, 373, 375 East Main Street for the redevelopment of an existing motel, restaurant, and bank to a multifamily housing with commercial and retail space. Again, this is the application for receipt. I'll anticipate Commissioner Boda's question. Do we have potential issue here for a public hearing?
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. So this application is for receipt. Again, the materials are in the Dropbox. This was received on Tuesday, I believe. I have not fully reviewed the materials yet. However, David identified that the fee seemed to be calculated slightly off, which I've started to discuss with the applicant. A majority of the fee has been submitted. And they did submit the fee for the public hearing. So I think it is a good idea to, that the applicant wants to do a brief presentation. And I think that would be helpful in determining whether or not a public hearing might be necessary, and also perhaps in clarifying the fee for the applicant.
Jamie, this is Commissioner Rose. I'm on Dropbox, and in the folder applications for receipt and review, this property is not in there. 41 Brainerd and 58 East Industrial R.
You're not seeing a third folder that's 200401, 367, 377, 373.
Inside applications for receipt and review?
Yeah.
No, I'm not, oddly enough.
Huh.
Okay, if it's there, it's there. We'll figure it out later. It's just a technical thing.
I'm not logged into our Dropbox right now, so you should be able to view it.
Yep.
The applicant has a, so I guess Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent before, Chairman Basserman, would you like to open up the floor to the applicant to give a brief presentation?
Makes sense. I guess for the receipt, it's going to be a short one, but that would be good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is John Neff. I'm the attorney for Metro 375 LLC, Metro Star Companies LLC, which are the applicants for this application. Thanks for the opportunity to briefly present to you. On your screen, you probably also see David Sacco, who is our professional engineer. He's going to be speaking to you very briefly as well. Let me confront first, or deal with first, the application fee. We miscalculated, and Jamie was kind enough to explain how we miscalculated, so we're happy to provide the extra fee. With regard to the public hearing fee, you know, we can, if the determination that no public hearing is required, and I think I'll be saying in a minute that shouldn't be, but you know, we can always, you know, roll that into how we have failed to provide, you know, on the other end. So we're happy to deal with the insufficiency of the application fee, you know, Friday, but early next week. The application itself is on the property located at 367 to 377 East Main Street. As you know, it's currently the Days Inn, Key Bank, and a former restaurant. It's adjacent to exit 55 off of I-95. And in fact, the property abuts a DOT property, which is where the bulk of the relevant wetlands are located. It's a strip approximately 500 feet long and 30 to 40 feet wide. There's only about 150 square feet of wetlands on our subject parcel. Right now, the property does not provide any stormwater treatment of any kind. My clients are proposing a complete redevelopment of the site, 143 unit residential community, commercial and office space, a huge upgrade to the site and to the entire area. Really created an attractive entrance into Brantford from I-95. We'll be providing state-of-the-art stormwater treatment, reducing impervious coverage, adding landscaping throughout the site. And the only wetland impacts, direct wetland impacts, is on 150 square feet to remove an abandoned drainage pipe, which is not necessary for the redevelopment of the property, but we think it's the right thing to do to get that pipe out of the wetlands and then to restore that wetland area. We have been before the Planning and Zoning Commission on an informal basis. This requires a PDD, and without saying much about that process, you know, I think the project was warmly received by the Planning and Zoning Commission when we met with them several months ago. So I'll turn it over to Dave Sacco, who can give you a few more details, and I think you'll see that certainly this is not a significant activity, and then you can make a determination whether it might otherwise require.
Thank you. Mr. Sacco?
Thank you. David Sacco. I'm a civil engineer with TPA Design Group in New Haven. We have just a couple of quick figures we want to share with you. I believe Jamie has them to show.
Yep.
This is the survey of the site. As you can see, it's extensively developed. The wetland is along the southerly limit of the property, mainly on the adjacent I-95 right-of-way, although there is a portion in the southeast corner that extends into the property. The site contains at present several buildings. It's paved extensively, very highly impervious surface. If you could go to the next one. This is the proposed site plan. The buildings are scattered around the site with a central green for the tenants. We're pulling back from the wetland on the southerly edge to provide a little bit of green space. The impervious area is slightly reduced. The overall drainage pattern is going to be similar to what it is now. Essentially, the southeastern half of the site drains toward the wetland. The northwesterly portion drains to the drainage system in East Main Street. And we're more or less maintaining that. However, we are overall producing less runoff at every storm level due to a couple of infiltration systems that we're introducing, as well as providing stormwater treatment. And if you could show the last image.
I try popping out a screen share and opening back up. I'm not sure why, but it's really small.
It's a different format.
Sure.
Really this is actually included in your packets. What we wanted to highlight is that the existing limit of development is the line in red that you can see. It's right along the edge of the wetland, right along the property line. There's a paved area in the southwestern corner that extends well south of the proposed building. The net footprint of the proposed development is pulling back from the edges of the site relative to where the existing development is. We're trying to increase the buffer to the existing wetland. The small green area that you can see at the head of the wetland is where there's an existing storm discharge pipe entering the wetland. We'd like to go in, take it out as part of the development, and replant, restore that small area. That's the single direct wetland impact. In terms of the upland review area, it is substantially within the limit of work. However, relative to the existing extent of development on the site, we will end up with less net impact than what is currently present.
Jamie, this is Commissioner Rose. Can you bring the page 2 site map into the center of the screen? Got it. And so, just so I know where I am in the world, Building E is essentially sitting on what used to be Margaritas, correct?
David Sacco, that's correct.
Thanks.
East Main Street is to the right-hand side. Building C and D more or less are around where the Days Inn buildings are. Building A is more or less where Key Bank is.
Thank you.
Mr. Sacco, this is Commissioner Basserman. Did you mention in your introductory comments, or maybe Attorney Knapp did, that there was a green in the middle?
David Sacco, yes. Between Building B and the clubhouse building to the right, that's an open lawn area for recreation, for people to picnic, to play lawn games, that kind of thing.
Thank you. And another question. Are you thereby saying, other than the removal of the pipe in the wetlands, there is no filling of wetlands?
David Sacco, no, sir. There's no intent to place fill in the wetlands.
Thank you. But Commissioner Basserman again, and all stormwater goes into the town system?
David Sacco, yes. At present, the way the overall pattern works, the wetland receives runoff from the southwest portion of the site, as well as the Interstate 95 right-of-way. And then it flows east to west through the wetland, and it enters a pipe in between Building C and 365 East Main Street. And that pipe system connects out to East Main Street, crosses East Main Street, and it discharges into wetlands on the opposite side of East Main Street in the headwater area of the Branford River. And that same pattern will continue. The area around Building B, Building C, and the clubhouse will drain to the wetland after going through retention systems and treatment, will drain along the wetland, enter the pipe system near 365 East Main, cross the site. The area around buildings A, B, and E drains to a retention system in the north end of the site, and then out into the overflow will discharge in the same location it currently is going. Actually, if you scroll up to the top image to the survey, you can see the heavy dashed line across the site is the existing drainage system that conveys water from the Interstate 95 right-of-way and the eastern part of the site, across East Main Street and onto the discharge point.
Thank you. Commissioner Basserman, with another question. Is this going to be a phased development, or is this all happening at the same time?
David Sacco, I believe the intent is to do this as a single development, single phase.
Thank you. Any other commissioner questions?
Commissioner Boda, has there been any public interest expressed in this project?
Commissioner, but you're asking Jamie or you're asking us?
I'm asking Jamie.
Okay.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. This application was just received on Tuesday. So I don't think very many people have seen it or heard about it yet. I did let planning and zoning know we received the application. And it's my understanding that the applicant has met with various departments to kind of guide their plan preparedness. I was thinking that I might share this with our planning and zoning usually has an early plan review group, just to make sure that everyone is seeing it and aware of it. So that way any comments those entities might have could get to the applicant sooner rather than later. But I also think the applicant has met with a lot of those parties already.
Commissioner Boda, I think just thinking historically, whenever we've had a large project like this, I feel like that they've typically gone to public hearing for public interest. But you know, it may be useful to just look back in our history and confirm that. And maybe there just needs to be a little bit more time to see if there is an interest in it. I feel like in the past, whenever we've had a larger development with multiple buildings like that, that does have gone to public hearing.
Commissioner Basserman, to follow up on that, Commissioner Boda, at this point in time, however, it probably would be premature to think about a third-party consultant to assist the commission. That's a question.
Typically, we've started to think about that, and we've done that, and that was part of the question early on, so that we have time to get the request for proposal out, and we have a number to choose from. We've typically done that either with receipt or the meeting following, so that we can schedule a public hearing and have input from all parties involved.
Commissioner Basserman, yeah, to me, it would make sense, to your point, to get the time for public comment, but also to the extent that we get a chance to look at the material, it's not apparent to me that this is beyond the commission's expertise right now to evaluate the proposal. It may be that as a result of questions raised that we find ourselves in that position again, but we have 30 days to figure that out.
Jamie.
Sorry, go ahead, Susan.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. So the agency has 65 days from the date of receipt, which is today, to set the public hearing. So you guys can take a look at the application materials and see if it's something that you might want to have a public hearing for. Also, the public has 14 days to submit a petition requesting a public hearing. So that decision doesn't have to be made tonight by any means. Also, I just want to clarify that the 3 pages we looked at tonight are only some of the site plan pages. The full site plan packet is available in the Dropbox.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, could I be heard? This is John Nuff.
Please go continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know that where the commission, what the current thinking is on the third-party review, but I mean, if there was the appetite, we would be, willing to concede a public hearing, not on the basis of significant activity, but on the basis of public interest. If that will help facilitate getting before the commission, and starting the public hearing sooner rather than later. Obviously, we'd love to be able to start our public hearing at next month's meeting, and so we can avoid whether or not 25 people sign a petition within 15 days. We can avoid having to do a presentation for you to make the presentation, whether or not there's a public interest for a public hearing, and just cut to the face and say, let's just go have a public hearing.
Commissioner Basserman, yes, understand that. Given the fact that, however, the material, was only just received, nobody's really had a chance to evaluate the, I'm sure, reams of material. It would seem to me that next regular meeting would be the appropriate time to make the determination of a public hearing.
Okay.
Any other discussion on this item? All right, next up, application for review. Inland Wetland 200201, 41 Brainerd Road, which is a residential lot subdivision. Material was, let's see, briefly reviewed last time. This is in the Dropbox, Jamie, is it not?
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. The materials are in the Dropbox, and there has been a new site plan submitted since the last meeting. That new site plan has the revised wetland delineation on it. We also have the new wetland report. We also have the test pit data for the infiltrator systems that are proposed, and I had the town engineer take a look at that, and he didn't have any comments. And we also have received a digital copy of the letter of authorization from the other property owner, because there's 2 different properties involved. So I know that we have a couple people on the meeting that are with the application. If you want to open it up for them to discuss, also let me know if you want me to pull up the site plan.
Thank you, Jamie. Commissioner Bassman, that's a question. Any additional comments from the public since I think we took a site walk on this property, did we not?
Yes.
Any additional comments from the public?
Most of the public, Jamie Frederick in the wetland, most of the public are muted. If anyone in the public does have a comment, in the lower right-hand corner, you can unmute your line. And by right, I mean left.
Hearing none, let's give the applicant an opportunity to address the changes and other pertinent items.
You want me to say?
You're up. Yep.
Okay, yep. Phil Belitis from Statewide Construction. We're just, like I said, we've tried to get all the information to you that we can, and hopefully nothing's changed. The one major thing that we did was we took the one concern was stockpiling the extra fill or material that was that was going to be dug up when we put the houses up, and we've removed that. There will be no stockpiling of anything on the site anywhere near it. So we have the means to take it off as we excavate. Other than that, I think everything is pretty much in the hands of Nafis and Young and David Lord. They've done all their work, and it looks like everything fits.
Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Basserman here. Jamie, time-wise, where are we on this application from a standpoint of statutory regulation time-wise?
Time-wise, a decision needs to be made. Jamie Frederick in the wetland agent. A decision needs to be made tonight, or an extension needs to be granted. And that can either be through the normal channels of extensions per statutes, or there has been an executive order that allows the commission to apply an extension up to 90 days.
Commissioner Basserman. And Jamie, was the stockpile the only issue that was raised either by the site walk or any other means? Or were there other issues as well?
Let me try and pull up the plan again.
This is Commissioner Rose. I'll just add to it that at the site walk, we all agreed that they need to reestablish the wetland boundary, which they've done. And they have that shown on their survey. So we have a current accurate depiction, and there's no activity obviously a lot of the sites in the upland review, but there's no activity over the line at all on the current plan. So that additional information helped.
All right, so I believe you should be seeing the site plan now.
Yes.
You can see the 4 proposed lots with the retention systems and the limits of disturbance. So some of the things that they were asked to look at were redelineating the wetland and putting the updated line on the survey, which they've done. We also asked them to eliminate the stockpile next to the wetland, which they've done. I asked them to pull the silt fence as far away from the wetland as possible to be able to get the grading and buildings constructed. And they also provided the test pit data information. And then the other thing that I had asked for was the authorization from the other property owner. If you want, I can scroll down to the grading page real quick. So the other thing I'd like to point out is that this application is just for the subdivision. It's not for the development of the lots. So you could have a condition of approval that specific lots come back for individual permits. I believe the 100-foot upland review line is, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor or not.
Yep.
It goes through lots. I'm not sure which lots those are.
This is Commissioner Rose. Can I ask a question of the applicant?
Yep. Go ahead.
Chairman Basserman?
Yes, go ahead.
Is it your plan to build these simultaneously, or are you going to build them as fast as you sell them?
We'd like to at least put up the first 2. We would like to do 2 and 2, and if they sell that fast, we probably will do all 4 at once.
Okay.
Like Jamie said, if we had to apply for a separate permit for the ones that were closer, we could do that.
And
Mr. Basserman, Jamie, it has been our practice to put down for when we have subdivisions that each individual lot has to come before the commission for determination, whether it renders a decision or whether it moves that to an administrative approval. Is it not?
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. I think a lot of times that decision is made when issuing the permit, which lots require commission approval. If you wanted to be a bit more open-ended, you probably could. I don't know if any of the other commissioners have comments regarding that.
This is Commissioner Ross. Just so I understand, lots 1 and 2 are moving from right to left. So
Sorry, yeah, from Brainerd Road down to Math. Yep, Brainerd Road
Okay.
down to Kenyon. Yeah, they should be numbered on top.
Yeah, lot 1 is the one that's on the corner of Brainerd and Matthew. And as you go down Matthew, the lots increase in number. Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent.
So Commissioner Boda, we have in the past just done the lot plans for, in this case, what would probably be lots 2, 3, and 4. So we haven't necessarily on these larger sites required those individual lot plans for each building, but rather the ones that are pertinent to the regulated area and the upland review areas.
So Commissioner Boda, are you suggesting that lot 1, I guess it would be, could be approved tonight, and lots 2, 3, and 4 would have to come back?
Commissioner Boda, I think if that is where the commission felt like it was reasonable, that would still be within our kind of fair and uniform practice.
Any conditions that, Commissioner Basserman, any conditions that we feel warranted at this point?
Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent. The one thing I'd like to identify is that the authorization from 54 Kenyon, which is the other property involved, all I have is a scanned copy. So I think it might be worth the commission considering requiring a original signed copy be submitted prior to start of any work. I briefly discussed that with town council just to make sure that the digital copy was okay to start with, but he seemed to agree that requiring the original copy certainly couldn't hurt.
This is Commissioner Rose. For clarification, as to Commissioner Boda's point, are we saying that because Lot 1 is completely outside the upland review, that could be approved using this site plan subdivision approval or this site plan approval within wetlands, but that we would want 2, 3, and 4 in order to be approved to come back with individual plot plans for each of those 3 sites? Is that what you're saying, Susan?
Commissioner Boda, that is a way that the commission could potentially move forward. I'm not suggesting that we should move that way, but I don't think that would be out of our past practice.
Can we approve the can we conditionally approve lots 2, 3, and 4 upon receipt of the plot plan for each of those individually, so that they can essentially trigger their own staff approval for lot 2, let's say, in particular, because they want to put up 2 buildings simultaneously, which logistically and from a cost perspective makes a lot of sense. So if they show up with that single plot plan and it's consistent with everything that's on this approved map we're looking at, that staff could approve 2, 3, and 4 as that additional information is received and verified?
Commissioner Boda, I don't think that we've ever done anything like that. I think that if we are going to say they need to come back for a plot plan, then that's something that would come to the commission, and then the commission might look at it and say, okay, this is all right, this should go to agent approval, so that the applicant doesn't have to wait the 30 days for the next regularly scheduled meeting.
So that kind of suggests that you think you might see something on an individual plot plan that you don't see on this combined map of the 4 sites.
Commissioner Boda, yeah. So if we look at, say, for example, lot 4, that right now is, one location where the building might go, but we want to make sure that for that plan that it, everything's moving, that it is still in an area that is appropriate to the regulations. So I think if we were to, if what you're describing, then I don't know why it would come back to the commission at all. So we could approve it wholesale. We could approve it and do the individual site plans for each of them individually. We can group them, 1 and 2 together, 3 and 4 together. We can do any variation of that. I think historically for sites, specifically 3 and 4, that those, because they're so much within the 100 upland review area, that those would likely come back. And I think that the important functions of the commission has been to act consistently and uniformly. And so I would advocate for that.
Commissioner Basserman, and is that not what we did with Gould Lane? I mean, each lot had to come back for approval. It's certainly a larger site than this particular one, but if they build 2 and then the economy continues to be a problem and we don't have the other 2 built and things change. So I think for fair and uniform, it seems to me that those lots need to come back.
Commissioner Ross here, I would agree with that, but I would go so far as to allow lots 1 and 2 to be approved together, with 3 and 4 having to come back. Based on our site walk, that I felt like 3 and 4 should be looked at, especially after 1 and 2 are built, to see how the hydrology might change those lots and to be sure that it's not creating a problem that we don't see on paper. So certainly 1 I would be comfortable with, and I would be comfortable with 1 and 2, but I think 3 and 4 should come back.
Would you like to make a motion regarding that, Rick? Commissioner Basserman?
Sure. I would make a motion to approve lots 1 and 2 this evening with the, I guess you'd call it condition that lots 3 and 4 have to come back to the commission for individual lot approval when they are ready to develop those lots.
Is there a second? Okay, back to square one.
This is Commissioner Boda. I'll second it, so we can clarify or put any, because I think there probably needs to be some addendums.
Okay, what addendum, back to Commissioner Basserman, what addendums do you think need to get applied?
Yeah, so I think that Jamie had mentioned one of the maps to an original copy, an original signed copy to be submitted to the wetland office, that the lots 1 and 2 submit an as-built that, and then we have some boilerplate that is helpful. I'll get if somebody can look at them, but like contacting the office.
Does it, Commissioner Rose, does it make sense to add a limit of disturbance line to this? They have their silt fencing, which could be one and the same as limited disturbance, but there's no reference to limit of disturbance or limit of clearing. And I wonder if that's necessary in this case to add that information.
Commissioner Ross, I actually think that's an excellent idea, so we don't have a clear-cut site like we did on Gould Lane prior to approval of the individual lots.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. I don't want to talk while there's a motion on the table. I might just suggest that you withdraw the motion and maybe have a little bit more discussion and then put forth another motion.
All right, Commissioner Ross here. I withdraw the motion previously submitted for the purposes of having additional discussion to add to that motion.
Thank you. Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. I just want to clarify a couple of things. One is that this application is for a subdivision referral without regulated activity. So the way it was submitted, it's not reviewing the regulated activity so much as the fact that this 4-lot subdivision works with, I guess, the regulations, and that so it's reviewing that it's in the scope of creating 4 lots. Let me share my screen real quick so that you can see the application form. So generally when there's an application submitted, the applicant pays a fee based on the area disturbance. Since you're looking at the 4 lots and not the actual regulated activity, they did not submit that fee. They just submitted a $50 referral fee plus the $60 deep fee. So I think to the point of what Suzanne was saying, there certainly has been a past practice of saying which lots need to come back, and whether that's lots 3 and 4 or it's 2, 3, and 4. I think you could go, obviously with whatever you want, but it's not that you're approving the other lots so much as you're approving the subdivision and you're saying that certain lots don't need their own inland wetland permit. That makes sense.
Commissioner Basserman, somewhere along the line I got lost. So we seem to be splitting hairs here.
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. In a way, yes, but I think it's important to note that this application is not for regulated activity. It's for the creation of the 4 lots. So again, it's not that you're not approving the development of the lots, you're approving the creation of the lots. So you can approve the creation of 4 lots and state that lot 1 or lot 1 and 2 do not require an inland wetland permit, but that lots X, Y, or whatever do. And then I think Suzanne was saying, I had a comment about an original signature that was for the authorization letter from the property owner of 54 Kenyon Street. So that was what my recommendation was earlier. And then I also know Suzanne was saying something about an as-built, and I think about maybe an inspection, or I'm not sure. So I don't know, Suzanne, if you want to touch on that again.
Commissioner Boda, so I think the as-built would be for those plans that are lots 3 and 4. Although I think that based on the site, that those are the ones that would be most pertinent to the upland review area and the regulated area. I don't know that, I don't want to speak for the commission. I don't know that a individual site plan or the as-built rather would be necessary for us for lot 1, maybe lot 2.
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. If you are going to require separate or require individual permits for lots 3 and 4, that would probably be the appropriate time to require the as-built, but that's up to you guys to decide.
Commissioner Rose, it seems to me that in each of these cases, they're going to, I would assume, be required to submit as-built to zoning because they're right on the building setback lines on each of the sites. Would that not be sufficient?
Inland Wetland Agent Jamie Frederick. A lot of times, yes, zoning gets as-built built, but Inland Wetlands doesn't always get a copy of it. So I don't think it hurts to require that this department directly gets a copy submitted for our records.
Can I ask a question?
Please do.
Okay, which is, what would it, maybe I misspoke.
Identify yourself, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Phil Belitis, Statewide Construction. Would it be better to just to go for all 4 lots at once, at least for the excavation and foundation, so that the site work was done all at once? And then start building the first 2 houses? Would that be a more, would that work better for you guys if we were to put in all 4 at once? Get all the site work done, get all the infiltrators in?
This Commissioner,
I thought that's what we were doing.
no, he had suggested doing them in pairs, Peter.
All right, right.
But I, in response to the question, I don't think the commission wants to motivate 4 foundations to get built, leaving the prospect that something horrible happens and
Gotcha. Yep.
we have
Makes sense.
we have foundations with no building on them.
Okay.
Commissioner Boda, so right now, I want to clarify where we are. Right now, we are ready to make a motion to approve this application. My understanding at the moment is that we would look for lots 3 and 4 to come back with individual lot plans. Is that representative of where we are as a commission right now? Is there a piece that I'm missing?
Commissioner Basserman, that's what I heard.
Commissioner Ross, yeah, that was my intention when I made the motion, would be to approve the subdivision, but require lots 3 and 4 to come back for permits.
Okay, Commissioner Boda. So Commissioner Ross, why don't you try it again?
Okay, I'll see how I do this time. I make a motion to approve the subdivision and to require lots 3 and 4 to come back to the commission to apply for wetlands permits, and for lots 3 and 4 to also provide us with as-built drawings at the completion of the construction. Did I miss anything?
No, other than I guess this Commissioner Basserman, other than the letter from the abutting homeowner that we wanted the signed copy in the file.
Commissioner Boda, second.
Any further discussion? We're gonna vote. I'll go around the horn again. Commissioner Rose,
Aye.
Commissioner Begeman,
I think I have to abstain because I wasn't on any of those site walks or anything, so I'm abstaining.
Commissioner Ross,
Aye.
Commissioner Boda,
Aye.
Commissioner Sullivan,
I abstain.
Commissioner Basserman is a yay. I think we have 4, Jamie?
I believe so. Is that what you have to, is that what you have, David?
Yes, I have a vote of 4 with 2 abstentions.
Okay. We squeaked that one through.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Peter. Just for clarification, I'm sorry to do this, but did we get in there the addition of a limit of clearing or a limit of disturbance line?
I don't remember that as part of the motion.
Commissioner Boda, I think that would not go with lots 3 and 4?
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, that certainly could be something to require when those lots come in.
Okay.
All right.
Okay,
We're going to move on to deliberations at this point. We have an agenda item 191101, 1151 West Main Street, a bank and a grocery store. Little history. It was determined at the November 14, 2019 meeting of the commission that a public hearing was required for inland wetland 191101 and established January 9th, 2020 for that purpose. In addition, the commission decided additional expertise was required to fully evaluate the applicant's plans. At a special meeting on December 4th, 2019, commission reviewed responses to its RFP and decided to engage Codispoti Associates. Hearing was opened on January 9th and continued February 13th, concluded on March 12th, 2020. Site walk was held January 18th. Tonight we begin deliberations on the applications, and I'm hoping we can conclude this evening and that the inland wetland staff would then consolidate those discussions into a written document, which the commission would review at a to-be-scheduled special meeting. If we don't finish deliberations this evening, then I'll ask the applicant for an extension. At this point, I ask any commissioner who feels that he or she must recuse themselves from participating in the proceeding identify themselves, and I will note that Commissioner Ross has already done that. Is there any other commissioner that needs to recuse themselves? Next, I will ask any commissioner to be able to participate in tonight's deliberations, that they must have attended all meetings of the application or listened to the recordings of those meetings. Commissioner Boda and myself attended all meetings, so I will now poll the remaining members to establish a quorum. Please state whether you have listened to the recordings and feel qualified to participate. Commissioner Ross.
No, I'm going to recuse.
Okay. Commissioner Rose.
I have listened to the recorded meetings and also read the meeting minutes, and I'm prepared to vote.
Commissioner Begeman.
No.
Commissioner Sullivan.
Yes, I have listened to the recordings and I am prepared to vote.
So we have a quorum able to deliberate and vote tonight of Commissioner Rose, Commissioner Boda, Commissioner Sullivan, and myself. Any comments to get us started on this?
Hold on, Peter.
Somebody said something.
Yeah, David McCarthy, for the record, you noted that Commissioner Boda was able to vote, but for the record, we didn't ask her.
I said that myself and Commissioner Boda attended all the meetings and therefore would not need to be asked.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
That's keeping me on my toes, David. Thank you.
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. Two points real quick. One, Commissioner Begeman, does that mean that you're recusing yourself from this agenda item?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. And then I also want to, Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent, I just want to clarify that if we are preparing a draft document like we did with the last public hearing in deliberations, which I suggest that we do, that would mean that the deliberations would be continued to another meeting. So either way, a continuance would need to be granted. So there are two options. Again, either the applicant can consent to an extension, or the commission can apply the extension that is available through executive order. So I would recommend that the commission deliberate, and if you're comfortable at the end of deliberating this evening, David and I can work on drafting up a document that you can review either at a special meeting at a date that you set tonight, or at the May meeting if you would prefer.
Okay, Commissioner Basserman, duly noted. I guess, do we have a summary of key points that surfaced during the public hearing that we need to address?
Jamie Frederick in the Wetland Agent. We did not prepare a summary because that was not asked for. I would suggest that the commission have a conversation regarding their thoughts on the application, and that might be guided by reviewing section 10.2 of the regulations, criteria for decision. And if you want, I can pop that up on the screen.
Commissioner Basserman, that would be helpful.
Okay. Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. If you want, we can overview some of the information though, like regarding alternatives or, and I do have a couple of comments regarding possible thoughts for considerations of conditions should you decide that you want to approve it, but I want to let you guys have your discussion before I jump into those.
Okay.
This is Commissioner Rose. It dawns on me in this context of where we're sitting and how this meeting is being conducted that it might be worth asking the very pointed question in terms of deliberating. Do any commissioners have any specific issues they want to raise that they don't think were addressed or still need to be, and get that consensus sort of out of the way?
Commissioner Basserman, the concern I guess I have when you say weren't addressed is, you know, we had a public hearing, opened it and closed it. Jamie, help me if I'm out of line here, but I don't think we can bring in, quote, new evidence at this point. Am I right or wrong on that?
And to clarify, so I'm using the wrong words, but it's well, go ahead, Jamie, you respond. I'm not sure how to rephrase the question, but I understand your point, Mr. Basserman.
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. I think I understand kind of both points here. So I think the question is whether or not that Commissioner Rose was asking is whether or not any of the commissioners feel that there's still outstanding information that would, I guess, deem the application incomplete. And to Peter's point, there was a public hearing, and I guess, you know, those requests should have been made during the public hearing. So was there a request made that maybe the material wasn't received for? I think the question on the table is whether or not the information is present to make a decision. I'm not sure though. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth.
Yeah, so I don't know why I'm fixated on this. I guess a different way of saying it would be if just theoretically, if any commissioner is inclined to vote no, then there's a reason or reasons. And in the context of deliberation, I'd like to hear those. I'm not suggesting there needs to be evidence or not, but essentially jumping to the end, if they've heard all the evidence, they've read everything, they were there, they've reviewed the transcripts, etc., then they have it in their mind at this point they're going to vote to approve or they're going to vote not to approve, and they have their reasons. And I guess I'm asking if we can drill down and get to the point that way. I guess I'm not helping, sorry.
Commissioner Basserman, speaking for myself, no, I don't have a preconceived notion at this point in time, which if it's helpful, and what we did with the last application that went to deliberation, you know, we went through A through F under 10.2 to make sure that we felt comfortable with the decision. And I'm not sure, we'll get that feeling until we deductively go through the 10.2.
Fair enough. Thank you.
That being said, the first item up on A is the environmental impact on wetland or watercourses. And to the extent that that is a big chunk of what our responsibilities are, does the applicant make a case that he is not negatively impacting, when all is said and done, the wetlands or watercourses? And I guess the question is the mitigation enough?
So, Commissioner Rose, I'll just jump in. I think the plan's well thought out. I think where they're restricted from making rock cuts are obvious, and they have provided. It's fortunate they have a area that's very suitable to mitigate and expand the existing wetlands and potentially make that a more productive area that looks like it's sort of abandoned, long forgotten land back there anyway, and they would be doing something positive with that. And the reduction in the water course on the top of the hill, I understand that it is what it is defined as, but it's essentially a puddle sitting on top of rock. And in trade for making that puddle smaller, we're going to get an improvement to an area in a larger wetland environment that I think is really improving improving the land in the back where the wetland's being mitigated, and certainly making a great addition to the town and doing the work that they're planning to do with the site overall as it faces the street. So I think it's a good plan, and I think they've addressed certainly the points that, as I went through the transcripts, the minutes, looking at the public's comments and specific issues they were raising, I do think the evidence addressed every one of the comments raised by the public, and I think we have a good result right now.
Commissioner Basserman, one thing that struck me when I reviewed the material, was the number of members of the public talking about why touch that area where the mitigation is going to take place at all. And I guess to the extent that we felt similarly, we could not require the same ratio of mitigation if we wanted to preserve that area that's already, functioning in the wetland. I don't know if that case had merit or not, but it struck me when I went through that I'm not sure, we've got a case like that where, we're actually going into a wetland area to try to mitigate and use that for the mitigation area.
So, Commissioner Rose, obviously I have no expertise in commenting on the efficacy of changing that existing area adjacent to wetland and expanding the wetland into it, but commonsensically, I look at it, there's nothing particularly redeeming about the quality of that, what was clearly disturbed area long ago. It was not ever restored or put back into a condition. At this point, it's overgrown, it's inaccessible, it will always remain inaccessible. It defies logic, I think, to, forgive the phrase, let them off the hook from giving us the amount of mitigation that the formula requires when it fills in such a neat area that's bounded by steep slopes and is otherwise inaccessible. I think they're creating an environment that actually can contribute more to the filtration of water and the flow off-site and under the railroad. And again, commonsensically, I can't see an argument against doing all of what they proposed and ending up with a better quality environment and a larger one in that location when the cost that's bringing that about is the reduction of a puddle on top of a rock ledge. I being blunt about that on purpose. That is what it is. It dries up when it evaporates, not providing anything in particular. And we're going to have a smaller one when the project is done, but we're going to have a very productive property overall when the project is done. And we're getting a great result in that area in the back by getting all the mitigation we're entitled to.
Well said.
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. In regards to the discussion regarding the mitigation area, the peer review consultant did provide some comment regarding that in Exhibit 62. And if you want, I can throw that up on the screen share for people to take a look at. I don't know if somebody wants to read it or if you want me to read it.
Can you, Commissioner Basserman, can you read the pertinent section quickly?
I can try. Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. So this is in response to the comments made at the public hearing regarding an alternative location for the wetland creation. And the peer review's response was, there are no other suitable locations for wetland creation other than the rear of the site. There is no space for high groundwater within the development area, and bedrock outcroppings dominate the central portion of the site. Further wetland creation in the location proposed will optimize wetland functions for the following reasons. As noted in Davison Environmental's January 3rd, 2020 wetland impact assessment, the degree to which a wetland provides wetland functions is determined by one or more of the following factors: landscape position, substrate, hydrology, vegetation, history of disturbance, and size. The determining factors that affect the level of function provided by a wetland can often be broken into two categories. The effectiveness of the wetland to provide a specified function is generally dependent on factors within the wetland, physical characteristics, whereas the opportunity to provide a function is often influenced by the wetland's position in the landscape as well as adjacent land uses.
Okay.
If you want me to keep going, I can.
Well, I think you hit the nut there. So, and any other comments regarding 10.28?
Commissioner Boda, so I think that as a commission, as a rule, it's we're tasked with ensuring that there is as little fill occurring in wetlands as possible. And I don't ever relish approving anything that has fill in it. I think the testimony that's been provided by experts, both the applicant and the peer review, has indicated that this is really the best option for this site. And so given those factors, I would say that this takes care of, this addresses that first A and potentially B within 10.2.
Commissioner Basserman, anyone else want to weigh in on this one? Moving on to B. Next up on the 10.2 list. And I think I heard Commissioner Boda say that she thinks that the comments made by both applicant and peer reviewer addresses B as well. Anybody take issue with that?
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. I guess the one thing I'd just like to make sure you address is, so there were a couple alternatives presented. The first one was the supermarket that was previously approved that had more impact than the proposal. The second alternative showed the bank pad location towards the rear, so that actually had less impact. But the applicant presented that that alternative was, while it was feasible, it was not prudent because of the needs of the site. And I can pull up more information on that if you would like. The third alternative was a progression towards what the site plan became, because the original submission had all or more of Watercourse 1 being impacted. Number 4 was a further refining 3 to increase, work out all the details. And then the fifth alternative that was identified in their alternative assessment was to do nothing, which they argued was not prudent. And they also argued that by developing the site, it could actually improve water quality. I would have to pull that up for more detail. And then the other alternative that was presented by the peer reviewer was to move the location of the building and the stormwater to because of the location of the contaminated soils. However, the applicant came back and stated that they were removing the contaminated soils around the stormwater system and that they would fill around that with new materials. So that, I believe, got rid of that concern, and the peer reviewers were not pushing for that alternative to be moved forward with. So I just wanted to kind of throw that all out there to remind everybody what the alternatives were.
So Commissioner Boda, I think it would make sense for us to look at the peer review comments for alternative 3 in moving the bank, as I think that is the one that would really.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent, just to clarify, do you mean the one where the bank would be behind the grocery store pad, or?
Yeah, the one that they said it's not prudent to move it there because nobody's going to go to a bank that when the bank wouldn't move into a space that was that far from the road.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. I am pulling up the site plan. If you want to look at their narrative that goes along with this, then let me know.
Commissioner Boda, can you clarify which document? It was helpful when you used the number earlier.
Oh yeah. So the alternative 2 site plan is Exhibit 14.
Thank you. Commissioner Boda,
Good.
looking for the peer review comments on this alternative.
I think to look that up, I'm going to have to stop the screen share.
Commissioner Basserman, are we talking about alternative 2 or 3?
Commissioner Boda, I was thinking it was 3. So prudent and feasible.
Yeah, but 3 on the exhibit list is 15, not 14.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. So are we looking at Alternative 3 is basically the start of the progression towards the plan that they ended up proposing as the plan they're moving forward with. Alternative 2 is the plan with the bank pad in the back that they're saying is not prudent. So which one are we talking about? Because
Commissioner Boda too, then.
and you want the peer review comments in response to that.
Yes.
Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent. So the first round of peer reviews was 18, 19, and 20 as far as exhibit numbers. So 18 is the engineering review and 19 is the soil scientist or the environmental scientist review. And then 20 is the review of the wetland delineation. So I would say probably 18 or 19 is what you're looking for. And I think that the engineering review also had the analysis of the alternatives. So I believe there was some back and forth on this.
It's Commissioner Basserman. Yeah, the alternatives feasible for Exhibit 18 dated January 3rd, 2020 begins on page 4.
Commissioner Basserman, this is Commissioner Boda. Can you repeat what you just said?
Yes, the exhibit that Jamie referenced, Exhibit 18, is dated January 3rd, 2020. This is from Codispoti, and it discusses the alternatives starting on page 4 of that document.
So Commissioner Boda, I'm on page, I think it's page 5.
Yep.
The claim, and I'm reading from the alternate plan 2. The claim, it is not prudent due to the bank pad proximity to the residential area and distance from the road is not congruent to the proposed use. Banks are not impulse purchases reliant on road visibility as might be a fast food restaurant. These are destinations and are often linked to the primary user. And it goes on. And all these customers may also be a bank customer who would stop at both venues in a single trip. The proximity argument could be mitigated by relocating the pad to the site, the pad site to the flat area adjacent to watercourse number 1. It is unclear as to why this is not financially prudent as there appears to be significant site work in both submitted and alternate plans. Neither seems more advantageous than the other.
Jamie Frederick in the wetland agent. I want to identify that exhibit 39 is the secondary review on this topic, and it has the applicant's response and then the peer review's follow-up response. So the applicant's response was, the narrative for this alternative explains that while the alternative is feasible, it was deemed not prudent given that the proposed bank tenant requires adequate visibility from the street, which is not achieved by this plan, being alternative 2. And then the response from the peer reviewer is, the commission can determine if other uses aside from a bank would render suggestions prudent or not. And I know that in their final analysis of alternatives that the applicant submitted, they also addressed their argument for why it was not prudent, if you want to reference that as well.
Commissioner Boda, Jamie, can you, there was just in that last sentence or two there, you used the words they a few times in a row, and I started to get a little lost about whether you meant the applicant or the peer reviewer. Can you just say it again and clarify?
Jamie Frederick in the wetland agent. So to clarify, the applicant response to what Commissioner Boda read was that the narrative for this alternative explains that while, and I think when they say the narrative for this alternative, they're talking about exhibit 16, or sorry, exhibit 12. While the narrative explains the alternative is feasible, was deemed not prudent given that the proposed bank tenant requires adequate visibility from the street, which is not achieved by this plan. And then the peer reviewer's response was, the commission can determine if other uses aside from a bank would render the suggestions prudent or not. And then I know there was some further discussion regarding this after this document was received at the public hearings. And then the applicant submitted a summary of their alternatives assessment. Which I believe might be exhibit 62.
Commissioner Bassman, was that 6.2?
Actually, no, I think 6.2 is. It's
Davidson Environmental.
Yeah, it would be exhibit 57.
Commissioner Bassman, I'm not sure we, have the authority to dictate to the applicant what kind of building, they should be using. They provided a plan, it had a bank in it, and that's the plan that we need to evaluate. The location of which, when all things are considered, there didn't to be a marked advantage of moving that location, that footprint, to somewhere else on the property.
Commissioner Basserman, this is Commissioner Boda. I would like to interject that it is our purview to determine if the applicant has met their requirement of providing prudent and feasible alternatives. And we may say, look, you have a prudent and feasible alternative in that alternative plan 2. You didn't have to fill that puddle or whatever it is that it's being referred to as, that rock, the rock ledge. The prudent and feasible alternative is not self-determining by the applicant. It is determined by the commission. And so they can say, well, we don't like that. any applicant could say, I want a 4,000 square foot house, but if they're on a lot that doesn't allow for it because they're going to fill, 1,000 square feet of wetland, we can say, well, that's not an option in this case. So the determination for prudent and feasible alternative falls to the commission. And so I think that that's why this kind of back and forth and what our peer reviewer says to us and gives us technical support on, that's what we can make our determination off of, because it's the commission that decides.
Commissioner Boda, yeah, I appreciate that thought. I guess where I was at was, it sounded like the Codispoti was saying, hey, if it wasn't a bank, if it was something else, then you have greater flexibility in moving that location. And that's what I was taking issue with, not so much the fact that anything that goes there that fills is subject to our approval.
This is Commissioner Rose. So I agree with what you're saying, Peter. The issue of reasonable and prudent doesn't have to do with the use and the buildings they want to build. It has to do with the wetlands and the land they want to build it on. And it is inappropriate, quite frankly, what a developer wants to do, what their vision is, and entirely subjective, for which they plan to put their money down and take the risk. The question is whether we want to enable them to take that risk. Telling them that they ought to find another tenant is way outside the bounds of what we're discussing, what tenant they have, and where they put that tenant, and whether that's a good or a bad idea, that's their deal. It certainly isn't relevant to what's reasonable and prudent within our jurisdiction. If we had a reasonable and prudent alternative to jackhammering the puddle that's full of water, or the rock that's full of water up on top, then we should look at that reasonable alternative. But it's perfectly reasonable alternative to allow them to do what they're doing, given the quality of that water course, and substituting what the law allows them to substitute, which is a more functional and beneficial wetland in place of a puddle on top of the rock. So
this is Commissioner Boda, and I want to clarify a couple of things. One, that the DEP there is nothing within the regulations or any language that puts a quality measurement, that there's a high quality wetland or a low quality wetland. That's not something that is used for a determination. And there is no definition for those things. So it is our responsibility to ensure that if we are going to allow fill in wetland, which part of the purpose of the wetland regulations is to ensure that the wetlands in the state of Connecticut are protected against the death of 1,000 cuts, which is a little bit of fill here and a little bit of fill there. And that we not say, okay, well, that one's a crappy wetland because everybody thought every wetland was a crappy wetland. So, but rather to look at the application a little dispassionate of the use of what is in the building. I mean, it's the footprint that matters. And so, it's nice that they've got a bank or whatever, but the first question, devoid of what is inside of those buildings, is the footprint and where they're putting that footprint. So I'm not arguing at this point for a denial based on that. I'm saying that we need to take very seriously the responsibility of setting precedent, again, that fill is okay in wetlands in Brantford. And I don't think that dismissing it as a rock pool, it's still a wetland water course, and it still falls under our jurisdiction to protect.
Understood. And I refer to them as my blunt words, although they do come off as demeaning. the value of that water course versus something else. But the statute exists for us to allow what they're proposing and to substitute mitigation somewhere else in order to end up with a greater good, which is their vision as an economic activity. That's their vision, not for us to comment on. Where they put it, granted, is entirely for us to comment on. But you know, it is quite a unique circumstance, I think, that however I want to characterize the water course that we're talking about, it is an island. It is sometimes wet, it is sometimes bone dry, and there is no, we're not protecting soils, we're not even protecting water entering the ground. We literally have a puddle, a circumstance created by people, and the puddle comes and goes. It doesn't recharge the ground. It's not contributing, where in fact that would be the case with the property that's being mitigated. And these are tools that the statute provides so that you can end up with a good result, when in this case, the water course, which I won't characterize it, that water course would be reduced and would still exist, not by filling, but in fact by taking away, because it is rock. They're talking about taking that away, and they're talking about putting a boundary on the edge of it, just as it exists today. So they're reducing the size of that water course, but it will exist. No evidence was offered to suggest that a smaller water course in that location is a diminution of anything that it provides to nature, when in fact the mitigation that's being offered in place of what would be lost in that rock plateau is a significant expansion of what is useful in terms of recharging the ground and providing filtering of water and so forth. So I would argue that in the case where the statute allows for mitigation, this is actually using that to get a better condition of the land at the end than we have now environmentally. What tenants they use and what buildings they build isn't relevant. The impact on the land is, and I think that just circumstances, not necessarily because they're all great designers, but circumstances has a perfect area to be expanded and end up with a contribution to the environment of that property by taking away something that is contributing very little by comparison.
Commissioner Bassett, with that being said, Eric, it's the success rate of man-made mitigation efforts, are all over the lot. And so hopefully it's an improvement, but that remains to be seen in all of those mitigation cases.
Fair enough, but I would argue that that's an issue of supervision and oversight.
Chairman Basserman, may I say something as well?
Please do, David.
This is David McCarthy, town staff. I can't recall where it is, and I have a mess of documents on my screen, but maybe Jamie, you can remember. But there was a note somewhere that while Watercourse 1 did not provide any additional water to infiltration due to it being on ledge, and that there were little soils, but it did, one of its biggest strengths was retention, stormwater retention on the site, in that there was very little wetlands left in that watershed, and that this acted like it had the, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, it said it had the ability to withhold the amount of water on site for a 100-year storm. And that's why I'm remembering that, but I could be wrong. I'm not referencing any materials on my site, on my screen, but pure memory. I was just noting that because Commissioner Rose was discussing its highs and lows, and I just wanted to point out that it did have that ability.
And I do think, David, that their drainage calculations, their 100-year storm events are unchanged by the presence of the watercourse 1 versus the mitigation in the back. Same amount of water is going to fall, same amount of water has to be dealt with, and they've dealt with it. And that is our problem to ensure, and it is their problem to protect their own investment, to have that be adequate. And they have done that with their designs. So while that watercourse 1 performed that limited function, they have, by way of designing the lots and the infiltrators underneath, the mitigation in the back, they have addressed all of the potential water they're going to have to confront on that property in the absence of watercourse 1. So I think that they haven't undermined that goal.
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. I think the document David might be talking about is the wetland assessment report, which was provided by Davison Environmental, which is Exhibit 9, that basically runs through the functions of the wetlands that's submitted by the applicant. I do not know, I don't remember the specifics of what you said, but I think that's probably the document that you were talking about. And as far as the 100-year goes, I think you're correct in the sense that they said it currently does not overtop in the 100-year. And I believe that that's true with the new designed stormwater drainage using the calculations that they provided. I know there was some public comment regarding concerns about those calculations. But the commission did not ask for more information regarding that. So I'm not.
Commissioner Basserman, regarding 10.2B, as in boy, are we, for prudent and feasible, are we at the point where the location of the bank building is the critical point here? Or are there other location issues that we have regarding prudent and feasible?
Commissioner Boda, I don't have, there's not a secondary issue. I think that for me, that's the primary issue with the prudent and feasible alternative analysis.
And I guess I was struck, Commissioner Basserman, I was struck, Commissioner Boda, with, I guess, the second to last sentence on page 5 by Codispoti, where it said, neither seems to be more advantageous than the other.
You're on page, Commissioner Boda, you're on page 5 of which
Of
exhibit?
the Codispoti document that discussed the alternative plan 2. The one that you read from 5 minutes ago. I'm sorry?
18? That was 18.
Yes, 18.
I think this is Commissioner Boda. I think that if we were to approve this, accepting this as the alternative, I think that we need to be very clear in our wording about the rationale for that, because we're allowing fill. I think that it needs to be clear as to why this is an acceptable alternative. Commissioner Rose, you spoke at length about that. I think I would encourage you to jot down some phrasing for why we would do that. I'm not really super comfortable with it. I don't believe that they've given a sufficient argument as to why that has to be in that way. I think that some of it sounds nice. I think from our past practices, we've been very, very conservative when it comes to allowing for fill. And I don't know that they've really met that bar. So I'm not suggesting at this point that I would vote to deny this permit. I believe that if it's going to be granted, that we have to make very clear why we're cutting an exception into our regulations to grant this permit.
Commissioner Basserman, might I suggest that when we conclude deliberations, whenever that is, that staff listen to the recording and capture the relevant points that Commissioner Boda as well as Commissioner Rose has made during these deliberations, so that we capture for your concern, Commissioner Boda, the relevancy of the fill of the wetlands in this particular application, and why we felt justified in moving forward if that's the case. I think it's going to be difficult tonight to do that without the benefit of the recording of the information that staff can prepare.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Boda again. And I think that that's a good idea. I think to help illustrate it, I think in our last application that we approved fill, and I think that this helps really shine a light on the difference, is that it was a difference between a road that was like, I don't know, 2,000 feet and 9,000 feet. Like, that's a very significant difference. And so that really stood out as to why it was feasible but not prudent. And the argument that it was that the bank maybe doesn't like it there, I think that's not an argument that rises to the issue of prudence.
Commissioner Basserman, fair enough.
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking for, Chairman Basserman. Are you asking for review of tonight's meeting or review of the public hearing? Or
Commissioner Basserman, I think what I heard expressed quite well by Commissioner Boda was the concern about filling the wetland. In the case of Sycamore Way, as she pointed out, there was a very significant difference on moving that road, filling it or not. In this case, as the Code Spody said, there wasn't a big difference between the alternatives. So if there's a justification for why we filled the wetlands, it needs to come out in whatever evidence was presented during the hearings, as well as our discussion tonight. To the extent that we can capture that and put that in a document so that we can review that, we might determine at that point that it is sufficient to move forward, or we might determine that it wasn't compelling enough for us to justify a decision.
Just picking on a word here, I don't know if this is relevant, but as I look at the construction documents, and I'm fixating on the word filling, that's the word that keeps getting used here. I don't see the activity of, and again, I don't know if this is relevant, I don't see that activity as filling. They're in fact blasting and removing a rock ledge, and they're moving the same berm that retains that puddle up on the watercourse one now, and they're moving it back. They're not filling anything. And so I wonder if using that term of art, filling, isn't putting us into a discussion that in fact this particular unusual circumstance falls outside of. Just asking if that might be the case.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. So I guess there's 2 points to address here. One, I'll address Commissioner Rose's first. Ultimately, the commission's looking at wetland impact. So whether it's filling or whatever it is wetland impact. I'm a little bit hesitant on the review you're looking for staff to do. I guess trying to think about how to phrase this. So it is the commission's decision. It is up to the commission to determine what is prudent and what is feasible. The peer reviewer certainly can provide guidance, but they don't decide. The applicant doesn't decide. It's up to the commission. I think that if I'm reviewing the materials and then presenting a summary, then it would be my interpretation, and I don't decide either. So I'm a little bit.
Jamie, I'm going to interrupt for a second. This is Commissioner Boda, because I think I hear what you're saying, and I also think that I interpreted Chairman Basserman's request a little bit differently than not a request for you to go back to the application, but rather to look at the recording of this past 10 minutes of the conversation. So where I had asked Commissioner Rose to write down the salient argument he had just made for why this alternative meets the criteria of prudent and feasible alternatives, that I think that is the piece that Chairman Basserman is saying. Would you be able to go back, look at the record of this conversation, and pull out the details, the main points that were brought up, as those would help to serve in our ultimate determination.
All right, Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. So to clarify, when you say prudent and feasible alternative, are you referring to the plan they're proposing, or are you referring to alternative 2?
Commissioner Boda. So Commissioner Rose was talking about why what they are proposing is the best alternative.
Okay.
So I think that is the point that Chairman Basserman was hoping you could look into the record and distill out the language that he was using to get to a determination. And then also following that, I had offered some clarification from my perspective about the distinction, or how it is that the previous application or permit that was granted, that one was, it was very clear that was about the prudence of that particular application, or that alternative plan. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I'm sort of struggling, but
I think the point that you made with respect to Sycamore is that the reasonableness or prudence of 2,000 square feet of disturbed wetland versus 9,000 square feet is obvious. More is bad. In this case, we're not talking about more versus less. We're talking about one approach versus another. So I think in the end, what you're saying is take the point, you're suggesting that take the points that I made and go through the record to see if there's something that either flies in the face of what I said or supports what I said. Is that what you're asking Jamie to do?
Yeah, but more, Commissioner Basserman, more taking the nuggets of the comments that you made that talk about why this is a prudent and feasible alternative plan two, is where I'm at. And by the way, it's not just Sycamore Way. I mean, we approved filling on 250 North Main. And so I think Commissioner Boda's concern is, how do we, application after application where there is filling involved, look at our track record on what we have allowed and for what reasons, and what we didn't allow and for what reasons. And this is another one of those applications where there is still involved and where we need to be kind of clear on why we decided to take the action that we did.
Of course.
Is that fair, Commission?
Yes.
Okay. Are you clear enough, Jamie, to proceed?
JB Frederick, inland wetland agent. I think so. So basically you're asking me to kind of distill down some of the points of why you're leaning towards making a decision.
Based on alternate two, I guess, here.
I will also, this is Commissioner Rose, I will also do what Commissioner Boda asked, which was to articulate in writing essentially what I was saying. I too can look at the record and find support for what I'm saying, so we can tie it back to that.
Jamie, in the wetland agent, I think that if you the meeting, that would be appropriate, but it should happen at the meeting.
What should happen at the meeting, Jamie?
I guess I just want to, Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, I just want to say that should happen at a meeting, and staff.
You blanked out.
Just to clarify.
What should happen at a meeting? Your video froze.
Oh, sorry. Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent.
Okay, that's divine intervention. So you froze again, Jamie, so nobody heard what you said.
I'll try one more time. Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. I think that if a commissioner wants to compile, points that they want to make sure they bring up at a meeting, that is great, and that you can bring that up at the next meeting. But I just want to make it clear that staff and commissioners will not be working on a draft document outside of a public forum.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting that.
I just wanted to make it clear.
Anything else on Commissioner Basserman? Anything else on 10.2 B? Okay. I don't know where this fits in. We were just discussing it briefly, but there was public comment on, I guess, the 100-year storm and the overtop, the design being inches within, I guess, the level of that 100-year storm. And I think I heard Jamie say that the commission didn't ask for additional material regarding that public comment. I guess I'm not sure. I felt I needed additional comment. It seemed to me that that was a concern that the commission should address in these deliberations, but I may be, a one-man band here. Everybody recall that discussion by, I think it was the Land Trust?
I think the I think what they're, if I remember correctly, they're proposing to reconstruct the berm at the edge of Watercourse 1, the revised edge of Watercourse 1, to the same elevation that exists today. So if it, at whatever that elevation is, it would have gotten overtopped by a storm event of one kind or another at that elevation, and it may overtop that elevation in the future. I would argue, however, that if it overtops it in the future, it's going to become their problem. But that's not doesn't create a problem for the water, for the wetland. It creates a problem for the water cascading down the rock face and into the side of their bank.
Was there a solution proposed?
I don't recall. I mean, it seems to me this, if they said there was a solution, it would be simple as increasing the height of the berm. But I don't remember them offering to do that, and I don't remember us asking to do that. But that's all you need to do, because that's all it is an earthen berm that's retaining the water in Watercourse 1. So if you're concerned about any particular storm event, you just raise the height of the berm.
Could we, Commissioner Basserman, could we make that a condition of approval, Jamie?
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. They do have an emergency spillway for if it were to overtop, because obviously you get storms that are larger than the 100-year storm. And also, you know, just a good design practice. So there, it does have a design to direct water in a certain direction once it gets a certain elevation. So they did plan for that.
Which am I making this up, or wasn't that in fact flowing to the south toward the property in the back that's actually being mitigated? Isn't that where the spillway went to?
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. I believe it goes towards Route 1.
No, sorry. It's the opposite.
But there could also be sheet flow that would go towards potentially. The spillway is.
Which exhibit is the site plan?
The latest site plan would be Exhibit 50.
Thank you.
I'll throw it up on the screen real quick. So this is the grading plan, and it would overtop and flow down through here. And then I believe that there's a, it ties into the drainage system here.
Yeah, so it's a swale that running, as you said, is at north, almost north-south. And that's how it overflows. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, the north is not up, but yeah. We look in the upper right-hand corner as the north arrow.
Yep.
Commissioner Basserman, thank you for the clarification, Jamie, and the discussion on the spillway.
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent, to maybe provide some more clarification, Peter, to your comment. when I mentioned that the commission didn't ask for more information on this during the public hearing. I mean, at this point, obviously, the applicant can't provide any more information. So the commission could have asked for more information at the last public hearing and asked to continue the public hearing so they could provide that information. I guess that's what I was getting at. But I mean, obviously, you're in this. You have to make your determination based on the information that you have. So.
Understand. Well, that additional discussion of where that water ends up going and how it's treated, if it breaches the 100-year storm, what was helpful. So where are we on our 10.2s?
Let me pull that up.
Can you put that back on the screen, Jamie? The
Yep.
Regulation?
Short and long term. Commissioner Bassman, I guess, do we have the appropriate notes on the plans? I think, if I remember, we did on the maintenance of the devices.
You mean the stormwater?
Correct, stormwater management devices.
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. There are some notes on the plans, and then also the applicant has submitted a stormwater report, which I believe also has more information.
And what do we define as short-term and long-term in terms of reporting, monitoring?
Is that a question for me?
That is.
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. So short-term and long-term monitoring, or?
Well, I guess I start with, how do we determine what the short and long-term impacts of the proposed activity is? Without a verification, if you will, in the future of monitoring those short and long-term impacts. And do we identify what those are?
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. So, I mean, as far as monitoring goes, short-term impacts, I guess, staff monitors the erosion controls and compliance with the plan while they're developing. And then as far as the mitigation areas go, they're required to do monitoring for at least 5 years. I think the commission needs to have a discussion regarding what they see the short-term impacts to wetlands and water courses being. So that would be the direct impacts, the impacts during development, and the long-term impacts, which would be the impacts once the construction is complete, that will, go on.
This is Commissioner Bassman. Do we have, something that, for instance, has some criteria for the created mitigation area in terms of plant survival or, water quality, or do we have those measurements that we can use?
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. For the mitigation that's required, there are some standard requirements, and those are identified in section 710, I think. And it does require 85% survival of plantings, and requires invasive species monitoring.
Commissioner Bassman, is that part of the boilerplate?
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. It is part of the regulations, and then there is a boilerplate condition that references mitigation and submission of a bond and mitigation completed in compliance with section 710 of the regulations.
Okay. So if we incorporate the appropriate boilerplate section, then we'll pick up that criteria in section 7 of our regulations.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent, I believe so, yes.
Okay. Any other commission or have a issue with item 10.2C in terms of the evidence that should be provided to say that we either met or didn't meet, I guess, that criteria? Okay, item D.
Sorry, Commissioner, Chairman Basserman, this is Commissioner Rose. I don't know if this answers your question, but do we have the ability to, we talked about inspections 5 years after, do we have the ability to have that be inspections for the longer of 5 years or the successful establishment of the mitigation that's called for?
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. So the language in the regulations is that shall be posted for a period of no less than 5 years. And let me take a. I think that the boilerplate condition language goes on to kind of expand on that, and it says something along the lines of, and shall be continued till but yes, it certainly has the ability to, and you could further refine the language in the condition to further address that if you would like.
I would certainly suggest that with respect to short-term and long-term impacts being the responsibility for us to oversee what they're doing, that as proposed, their preferred plan, this mitigation is extremely important. And as you already pointed out, Commissioner Basserman, these things have a track record of not succeeding. And it seems to me we should retain authority and jurisdiction and active inspections until they succeed.
Commissioner Boda, I have that section of the boilerplate up. Do you want me to share my screen?
Commissioner Basserman, yeah, that would be good. Thank you.
I'm not sure if
I can't.
Can the host do that? I think only the host can do that.
The host can do that.
But I can pull it up real quick. I actually have that tab open.
Sorry, this is David McCarthy speaking. Jamie, if you share your screen, anyone at that point can then request to take over. So when we did a trial run, you shared your screen and I requested.
We already have it pulled up, so it's just going to be easier for me to share it. So it's number 16. Installation and maintenance of the mitigation areas will be consistent with section 710 of the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Regulations of the Town of Brantford, which includes the submission of reports by 6 months, 1 year, and annually thereafter up to 5 years, 85% survival rate of vegetation, control of invasive species, and approved erosion control measures, and submission of a bond that meets the approval of the agency. Is that the one you were looking at, Commissioner Boda?
Yes.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. There is a little bit more, the language in section 710 of the regulations is a little bit more open-ended, and this boilerplate language can be adjusted to your needs for this application.
Yeah, because I think you need to be a grammar expert to ensure that the punctuation being used in that sentence doesn't undercut the goal of monitoring for however long it takes to ensure success.
I guess, this Commissioner Basserman, I guess, Jamie, when you prepare the document for our review at the to be scheduled special meeting, I guess to the extent that you can merge section 16 here of the boilerplate with section 710 such that it's clear that we can continue to monitor these things until established. I think that would be good.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, we can do that. I will also, part of the process of us drafting up a document is we will share it with town council for their review and comment. I definitely think it can be extended beyond the 5 years. I don't know that it can be extended beyond the life of the permit. That would be the one thing I would caution.
What's the life of the permit?
You're going to ask that question. In this case, it's going to be dependent upon the zoning approval, which usually is 5 years without extensions.
The life of our permit is limited by zoning permit?
Yes.
Yep, that's a change a couple of years ago.
Okay.
You know, looking at 710, Jamie, I don't see where there is a lot of wiggle room.
Let me see if I can pull up that.
Item E, Commissioner Basserman, item E, or any other activity as specified in best management practices as defined in section 2.1C of these regulations is kind of the only additional sentence that carries beyond item 16 of the boilerplate.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, I think A and B kind of talk to it as well, with A saying a bond in accordance with section 13 shall be posted for a period of no less than 5 years. And then B goes on to say report intervals of 6 months, 1 year, and thereafter annually for a period of no less than 5 years. So I think that in the condition, the commission can kind of provide more guidance.
It should be because of the statement.
If it's going to be extended past 5 years, it would be extended because you have not met the criteria identified with like 85% survival.
Okay, well, you pardon me, the Commissioner Bathroom, you'll review that with town council.
Yeah, Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, we certainly will. I also know that the commission has in the past come up with conditions specifically for applications that addresses this point.
Okay.
I will also look at that history.
Where are we? 10.2D? D or E? 10.
Patio door.
I don't know. I guess it's hard for me to suggest, I guess at this point, given the existing wetland condition and the mitigation activity proposed, that there would be irretrievable loss of wetland or watercourse resources. Anybody else feel different?
Commissioner Boda, can you say that again?
I don't see, it says D, irreversible and irretrievable loss of wetland or watercourse resources, which would be caused by the proposed regulated activity. My sense is that given the mitigation work associated with this project, that I don't know that I could say that there's irretrievable and irreversible loss of wetland.
Commissioner Basserman, may I say something?
Please do.
Jamie and I were discussing this earlier.
David, can you introduce?
Yes, sorry, David McCarthy, town staff. Jamie and I were discussing this earlier in that we wanted to make sure to prompt this discussion should it not happen organically. And speaking to section D of 10.2, irreversible or irretrievable loss of wetland or watercourse resources, we were discussing how the alternative that's being proposed as the main plan, how it intends to bisect or cut off into that rock ledge, but then put up a wall to sort of, I guess, lessen its volume or reduce its volume. And we were discussing how that process could be achieved without dewatering the existing water should there be water in there when that occurs, and what that looks like as for loss or for all intensive purposes irreversible damage.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent, just to kind of clarify on that, David and I were discussing were possible things for the commission to consider as possible conditions of approval should you decide to approve the application. And the concern would be, there was concern raised during the public hearing about dewatering of watercourse 1 when the blasting of the rock occurred. The applicant submitted information that suggested that dewatering of the remaining portion of watercourse 1 would not happen. So the possible suggestion would be considering whether or not a condition of approval addressing either, well, kind of twofold, having an inspection prior to that activity occurring to discuss the current conditions and ways of moving forward, because it seemed like it was kind of open-ended during the explanation, and that it would be based on the current conditions and status of that water course. And then the other side of that would be whether or not there should be a condition addressing what happens or what's required should dewatering of the full water course happen. I'm not sure that that's extremely relevant right now, but I mean, it does fit into the context of this, I suppose, but.
Well, the Commissioner Rose. So the issue, obviously, of dewatering is to lower the level of water or eliminate it so it doesn't flow into the construction area and screw up the activities. In this case, they're taking a reservoir and they're reducing it by a significant percentage and making a smaller reservoir. We don't know. So the water is not going to stop just because the reservoir came. The water is going to go somewhere. You could, as a condition of the approval, you could require that they expand the so-called, well, I'll use a different word. They could expand the depression at the top of the rock ledge to essentially expand what would be eastward and southerly, so that they can retain as much water after as they do now. You could also require as a condition that the berm itself be constructed in a location that permits the blasting, and the berm be in place before you get to the finished boundary that is planned for the blasting. So imagine, in this day and age, we can blast within inches of things. We don't need to, assume that we're going to destroy everything 15 feet on both sides of every hole we bore. We can literally stop things exactly where we intend. They could be required to build the berm to the elevation that's on their plans in advance of doing the blasting, but at a position farther east. It gives them some working room, and then they have their water retention piece in place. They do their blasting, and then they simply pull back that berm to the face of the rock ledge that they had planned on. You could do one or both of the things I just said. Increase the size of the depression and retain as much water afterward as they do now, or require that the berm be put in place before they blast the face.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. So they are proposing to put the berm in place before blasting, so that ideally when they blast, the only part of the wetland that will be impacted, or the water course that will be impacted, is the portion that will be removed. So the concern is that when you blast, if there are cracks in the rock that dewaters the rest of the wetland, or something else happens, what happens then? So I think that the applicant has presented information that they don't think that's likely to happen, but if you're going to approve the application, you might want to consider, if that happens, what's required. Are they required to come back for another permit? Are they required to submit a plan that has been developed by certain professionals as to how they're going to make sure that that wetlands, once, water's returned, is functioning the same? I don't know what that looks like, but that was kind of the suggestion. I think we're kind of outside of the scope of what you were looking at as far as section 10.2, and we're kind of moving on towards specific conditions of approval right now, but I might be misspeaking.
Well, I think the conditions we're talking about would be in response to things under 10.2, but so what this is interesting, because essentially one of the things we haven't talked about is, so I was saying earlier, we're taking a low functioning water course. Understood, we don't make those distinctions, but to be practical, I'll say the unsayable. We're going to take this low functioning water course and expand a more highly functioning wetland. And they don't know, and they couldn't know, whether they're going to fracture the rock in such a way that it would become a sieve after the work. It's been previously quarried. There could be fissures up there that don't have a route out of the side of the hill yet. And as soon as they shoot the face of the rock back 10 feet, they could essentially get to fissures that are already there, and voila, the pond drains out. So that's another layer to Commissioner Boda's concern, sort of as a standard of filling wetlands under any circumstance. There is a real risk that by shooting that face and moving it back, they could create fissures that would drain the pond, or they could encounter fissures that already exist that would drain the pond. The answer to what do you do about that is simple. You can grout all of those potential fissures without knowing what the end is, how much grout you're talking about. There's only one way to solve that problem, and grout is the way you would do it. I don't know if that goes beyond our ability to make it, conditions, but it's entirely possible they could create or encounter conditions that would drain that pond forever. And grouting it would be the only way to fix that problem. And even that, given that the earth never stops moving, potentially grouting it would only be temporary until things change through erosion and time. It's an interesting issue.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. So this issue was brought up in part, at least by the peer review team. They asked for more information. The applicants submitted more information, and the peer review team did seem satisfied with the response. So the proposed possible condition to consider would be in the context of sometimes the commission has conditions that kind of set up
What if scenario?
by what the process is moving forward. So like with Sycamore Way, there was a condition regarding should the plans need to change due to other agencies' requirements that impact the wetlands, you would need to come back for approval. That it is kind of self-evident based on the regulations. This would kind of be addressing that and basically saying whether revised approval would be necessary possibly, or, you know, that would need to be brought to the commission and the commission would need to determine. It'd be kind of more of like a flag, like identifying that there could be further approvals required or further steps required. Or I don't know, but that's initial guidance.
Without offering a solution, if the contingency happens, you instead say, if the contingency happens, you have to come back to the agency.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. I think that's essentially what I'm getting at. The commission has to make their determination based on reasonably likely impact, and there's nothing, in my opinion, it's up to your opinion, in the record to suggest that it is reasonably likely. But I think that identifying it as a concern and what the steps might be appropriate. But also, you know, should it happen, there's other, I just wanted the commission to consider that.
Commissioner Basserman, didn't we have a discussion on this point that after the blasting that there would be you know, some monitor, some evaluation as to whether the water was still in the pond? And if not, couldn't we make that the condition to say if we find that the water is drained out, all activity stops, and we reevaluate?
Well,
to avoid the item D, which is irreversible and irretrievable.
Well, this is Commissioner Rose. I mean, you know, part of the year that area up there is dry as a bone. You know, if it doesn't rain, it'll stay dry as a bone. If it rains a lot, it'll be really wet. I mean, what can you control? And while it's more likely than not we could create or encounter fissures, that doesn't mean we would see where the water goes. It's not a given that if fissures were there or were created, that the water would flow out of the face of the rock after they blasted it. It could go somewhere else, and we'd never know where it went. And then we're talking about whether we should be, you know, requiring construction to then hold water on top of that rock when the rock doesn't want to hold water anymore. Now, you can go around and around with this. It's almost it's like once we say go, well, just because they didn't present to us the real possibility that conditions could occur that would keep that area drained forevermore, just because that's not in the record, I don't think we should be ignoring the prospect that it really could happen, that it will stay dry forevermore.
Okay, I guess I'm still stuck on D,
Right.
where I'm not sure how to really then interpret D. You know, do we say anytime we fill a wetland, there's a irreversible and irretrievable loss, and then we have to say, but in this particular application, there is also wetland creation, which we therefore think offsets, quote, the loss, or is that condition D much more narrow than that, and it doesn't address the mitigation area, it only addresses the loss of wetland. I'm not sure how to interpret D.
Chairman Basserman, if I may.
Please.
This is David McCarthy speaking. Not to, unfortunately, aid you in your interpretation of D, but something worth noting as to what Jamie pointed out, which is what would happen should post approval and construction, we realize that this watercourse no longer holds water. The approved mitigation area was based on the area of disturbance, meaning what area would be taken away, but should the rest of it no longer remain functioning as it currently stands, that area is not incorporated into the 2-to-1 ratio mitigation area. So again, I'm not really helping you clarify that, but I am pointing out just something else worth noting.
Well, Commissioner Rose, if you take what you just said to its logical conclusion, given the prospect that that could turn out to be dry as a result of the construction activities and never be a water course again, then you might reject the permit on the basis that they need to take that prospect into account and provide for mitigation in that event.
Commissioner Basserman, but we got to be careful. We could, I suppose, put a lot of worst case scenarios out there, but are we not really restrained by what is likely given the evidence presented?
Well, that's what I was referring, Commissioner Rose, that's what I was referring to by, not rewarding them because something's not in the record. The reality is that, rock is fissured. That's a fact. It always is. It's just natural. And it's been quarried. So add that to natural erosion and earth movement. And now they're going to blast on the edge of it. So it's not crazy to be talking about this. And given what we know as facts in the construction world, facts in the blasting world, facts in blasting in ledge like this, whether it's on the record or it's not, it's true. And these are facts that we're presented with these risks.
Commissioner, wait, I'm going to interrupt Commissioner Boda. So whether those facts exist or not, they're not part of the record. And so I don't think that we can be incorporating them into the deliberations in the way that they help us make a determination. I think a remedy that we could put forward and a mechanism that we can think about is that if a fissure were to occur and that water course to be drained, then they would no longer be in compliance with their permit application and that they would have to then provide a remedy. And we might consider putting in, I don't know if we could do this, but I'm just sort of talking out loud that we might consider a condition that they create a contingency plan in the instance that were to occur. But even if they didn't, if it did occur, we would have recourse in that they were no longer in compliance with their permit, and then we would have either failure to comply with their permit or an enforcement action separate. So we would not be at a loss for recourse. That being said, I've been sitting in video conferences all day, and my eyes are starting to fail a little bit, starting to have a hard time reading this text. I need 2 minutes to go grab some ibuprofen. If I'm gonna just step away from the computer for a minute.
Commissioner Basserman, we've been at this almost 3 hours. Is this a good time to take a 2 to 5 minute break? Everybody get up and walk around a little bit, et cetera, while we take care of eye strain.
Sure.
All right. See you back a bit. Where are we at?
D, Commissioner Boda, D.
Yeah.
Would you? Jamie Frederick, and the wetland agent. Do you want me to put it back up on the screen, the section language?
Sure. I guess I'm stumbling over that first part, which is irreversible and irrecoverable or whatever. And I guess where we fill wetlands, that becomes an issue.
Well, Commissioner Boda, so I think that goes to the first or 10.2b, right? So that if there is no prudent and feasible alternative, that then there is going to be filling or impact, but that the mitigation then kind of ensures that there's not irreversible and irretrievable loss of wetland, because they would be some wetland gained through the mitigation / creation.
This is Commissioner Basserman. I guess, if I look at the term wetland or watercourse resources to include, for instance, the totality of the resources on site, as opposed to individual wetland and watercourse resources, I guess I could see my way clear to take that explanation and say that the mitigation provides for other than irreversible and irretrievable loss.
This is Commissioner Boda. Yeah, I think that if you don't read it that way, then there would be no mechanism by which we could ever permit an application that has fill.
Right. Right. Commissioner Basserman, is that helpful to anybody else?
And sorry, and Commissioner Boda again, and I think that goes to number 3, 2, and 3, right? So, the first tact is always to prevent or minimize, but then as we get further in, that following the order of the priority of restore, enhance existing wetland quality, which is what the applicant is proposing. Enhance, right? Restore, enhance, create productive wetlands. So that is what they are putting forward in their application.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess as we probably provide information on that document, Jamie, it's because of the 2-to-1 mitigation that is part of the plan that is proposed, that in totality the wetland and watercourse resources are not deemed irreversible or whatever the other word was,
Irretrievable.
irretrievable.
Just, Commissioner Rose, just out of curiosity, the preamble says that we will take into consideration all relevant facts and circumstances, including but not limited to irreversible and irretrievable loss. It doesn't say necessarily that we have to have a solution for those things. We just have to take them into consideration and address them.
Commissioner Basserman, thank you, Commissioner Rose. And I think, as we discussed in the hearing as well as tonight, the mitigation, that kind of is the overhanging solution to any of that fill issue or blasting issue, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Can we move on to E?
I don't see E being an issue here, Commissioner Rose. In a negative sense, there's no negative with respect to safety, health, or the reasonable use of the property.
Commissioner Basserman, I'm inclined to agree. Any commissioner feel differently?
Commissioner Boda, I think that the primary issue around health was the contaminants, and they have included within their plan an appropriate method of dealing with those contaminants that would prevent issues of health and safety.
So to put that in the positive, as you just did, 10.2E has been satisfied by the applicant, both for safety and health issues as well as use of property. Item F. Commissioner Basserman, this if I remember correctly, and looking at the plan here, it looks like it ties into the town's water management system. I'm thinking of the outside area activity. So I wouldn't see where this has an impact on area outside the site, given the fact that it ties into the town system.
I agree.
And the town system is sized enough to accommodate.
I agree, Commissioner Rose.
Jamie Frederick in the wetland agent. I believe it ties into the state system,
I'm sorry, Commissioner.
just to clarify.
Yep.
And then also into, I'm drawing a blank on the name of that resource. Did my screen share just change? Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent.
We're looking at the site plan GD1.
Okay.
Exhibit.
Yeah, so the drainage ties into the town system and, or the state system in Route 1, and it outlets to this water course that I can't remember what it's called.
Yep.
Mill Creek, I think.
Okay, Commissioner Bass, we've gone through 10.2. I'm trying to remember what we did with Sycamore Way. I clearly know that we went as we did here with 10.2. Did we go through any other areas, Jamie?
So I think after 10.2, we went through some staff comments and then through the draft boilerplate conditions. So I guess before kind of moving off from 10.2, the commission had a bit of a discussion about whether they were leaning towards approving or not based on the discussion regarding 10.2.
Okay. Do we do that? Or should we do that by going to each commissioner and getting a sense in some kind of roll call order? Or do we just want to open it up for general discussion?
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. I think that's up to you, Peter.
This is Commissioner Boda. I would like, I think prefer to hear any additional staff comments and maybe do that. Some of those, I don't know, maybe the boilerplate stuff holds off, but if there are staff comments that are going to be relevant and in a way that kind of, I don't know, bring to light any other things that we haven't taken into consideration, and rather have it first.
Commissioner Bassman, that seems fair. Jamie, you want to enlighten us with any additional comments that you think are worthy of getting on the document, or at least have discussion before it goes on the document?
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. So we touched base on the first one, which was the whether or not the commission might want to consider a condition, either so a condition of approval addressing what happens should watercourse 1 dewater, basically stating whether, separate application would be necessary, or as Suzanne pointed out, it would not be in compliance with the plan at that point, and it would be a violation. On a separate note, similar to that, would be whether the commission would want to have a site visit prior to that activity occurring to touch base and make sure everyone was on the same page. Another note based on something that David brought up is on the landscape page, note 13 talks about should dewatering be necessary in the creation area. The note 13 states that a temporary sediment trap would be used, whereas EC2 indicates use of temporary groundwater dewatering bags. The note on LL1, the landscaping plan, does also, it's a little bit more open-ended, so it does allow for other measures to be used as directed by somebody. We can take a look at that if you want. The suggestion there would be maybe having them clarify and make those notes connect a little bit more and say the same thing. And then
this is Commissioner.
One of the things that.
Hold on, Jamie. This is Commissioner Bassman. Commissioner Boda had a comment.
can you just, can you clarify what you wanted clarified? I'm sorry,
I can try.
I didn't follow it.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. I'm going to pull up the site plan again. So on EC2, this shows the creation area and it's the erosion controls that are proposed. I'm sorry, I don't know how to scroll in or zoom in on this app. But they're proposing on this plan to use a temporary groundwater dewatering bag. Should dewatering be necessary to achieve the grading and the work that needs to be done for the creation area. And then on the landscaping page, LL1, note 13, which you cannot read. Qualified wetland scientists may determine that dewatering is needed during the grading and planting of the creation area. If necessary, excess water will be discharged into a temporary sediment trap. The need for dewatering and any specific method for dewatering is site-specific and may be modified by the contractor to accommodate field conditions. Contractor shall provide the means and methods of dewatering consistent with 2002 Connecticut. So I think this is kind of a general comment, and then on the erosion page, they kind of applied the more site-specific measure, which is the groundwater dewatering bag. I guess the suggestion would be to have that identified on this page as well, so that the information is consistent.
This is Commissioner Rose. So in this case, what they're doing is they're establishing with their subcontractor that whatever contingency occurs, they're responsible. And that's, for them, that's a scope and cost issue. So from our perspective, what's missing is they refer to the state regulations that you cited, but they should be referring to those and the wetlands regulations and our permit. So you could argue that if we approve the drawings as submitted, they're stating unequivocally that they're delegating and assigning that responsibility to their sub to deal with the unforeseen contingency, but they're only requiring that it be done in accordance with a set of regulations that aren't ours. So you might, as a condition, add to the regulations they need to comply with in a case where they have to come up with a siltation control or whatever the case is.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. So I think that the note on the landscaping page is okay because it is open-ended and it does provide for the on-site adjustments, but and as far as the reference state manual, our regulations do reference that document as a guidance document, so I think that's okay as well. I guess the point of consideration is, does the commission think that identifying the use of the temporary groundwater dewatering bags on this page to make sure that that's highlighted as what has been identified in the proposed plan be put on here, or are you satisfied with it being on the erosion control page? And then the provision that allows for additional or alternative methods that might be better for. I guess the concern is that on one page they're proposing dewatering bags, and on the other page they're proposing a temporary sediment trap. And I think that that is a different level of disturbance. But that I mean, I don't know. That's up to you guys to decide whether you think that that's a contradiction, or if you just think that that allows them to choose the the method that's going to work best. And it does say, qualified wetland scientist may determine. So it does leave it up to a professional that has, the wetland interests.
This Commissioner Basserman, Jamie, is it not likely that depending on the condition, you might go in one direction or the other? Sediment trap versus the bags. They're not. It's not either one will do the same job.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. I think the wetland scientist is much more qualified to make that determination than I am.
Yeah.
And I do think that different sites require different methods. And it's quite possible that site conditions might
Dictate
changes than what they originally proposed. So it is quite common for plans to have some level of
Flexibility.
language written in to allow for adjustments to meet site needs.
Commissioner Basserman, and do we not have that within the notes that have already been expressed on EC1 or EC whatever and LL1?
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. I think if you're satisfied with it the way it is, that it is okay.
So what I guess Commissioner Basserman, what I heard was your first two comments might need to be reflected with some language in the document that staff would prepare.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. I'm not sure I follow as far as what you mean by
Well,
first comment.
you bring up number one, right? You had staff had an issue with your first comment.
You mean Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. So you mean the water course 1 impacts and then the erosion control notes, or?
Yes. Right, the one where the suggestion was maybe a field visit prior to dewatering, I think was your comment, to ascertain the condition before the dewatering started.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. So to clarify, that wouldn't be dewater. That first comment was in regards to water course 1 and basically having an on-site meeting to discuss essentially the activity and what precautions they were taking based on current conditions. Basically just touching base on any field alterations they feel they're going to need to make as they're putting the berm in, making sure that there's an open dialogue during that process to help minimize any possible impact, and also so that if there is an impact, staff would be aware as quickly as possible. That's kind of the thought behind the first comment. The second comment, it seemed like the commission didn't necessarily think was necessary, which is totally fine. So I guess I would be looking for clarification as to whether or not the commission would want to bother with a condition there, or if they think that is necessary.
Is Commissioner Basserman. Go back to that first one. Wouldn't staff normally, when there is an on-site kind of condition that needs to be evaluated, wouldn't that be part of the normal field visit that staff would make on something like this? As opposed to, I'm saying, the commission needing to meet and for a site walk on that.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. So yeah, when I meant an on-site meeting, I meant with staff and the applicant. So I think maybe the simple way to address that concern would be, we have a erosion control inspection prior to land disturbance as a standard inspection that we do. So maybe just parsing that out to say, to address phase 1 and phase 2, because there's a phase 1 erosion control page that addresses the mitigation area in the back. And then there's a phase 2, which is for the development. So making sure that we have inspections at both of those times. And then also, I don't know if the commission would want to consider either an inspection or just a notification to during the wetland. And yes, the portion of the wetland that will be removed will be dewatered, I think, prior to removal, when that will be happening, just so that it's on our radar that is occurring.
Yeah, so Commissioner Basserman, so it sounds like you want to incorporate the fact that staff will be meeting with the contractor at, you illustrate what points along the construction you want to do that with. I guess if you find that there's an item that is beyond the scope of your evaluation as an enforcement agent and you need to go to the commission, then we'll deal with that at that point in time. But the note, I guess, that we're talking about is the communication with staff.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. It would be your permit, it be your conditions. I'm just trying to provide thoughts as to what I think might be useful. So I think there's kind of a little bit of opportunity for the commission to decide what direction they want to go in with it. If you want me to just draft something up for the draft permit in that scope, I can work on that and have town council review it, and then it would be distributed to you guys. So I guess I'm wondering if you want to provide more guidance, or if you just want me to kind of, and if you put anything in there at all.
Commissioner Bassman, I think it would be appropriate for you to draft up a document that you feel accommodates your role in staff in the construction phase of a permit. And so if you normally would want certain points in time where staff is involved in a face-to-face meeting on site, then I think you put that in as one of the items that is part of that document that the commission will review at its special meeting.
Chairman Basserman, this is Eric Rose, Commissioner Rose. I think what I'm hearing is that within the design documents that are going to be subject to the permit, there are events and methodologies that are stated in there, giving a contractor choices as if they could do that without our oversight as written. And then they found 2 places where the documents are internally inconsistent, or at least might turn out to be internally inconsistent. I think what Jamie's trying to do, what we want to do, is to say that if these things occur and choices need to be made, they will be made in concert with staff, with Wetlands Agency. We could go on ad infinitum on all the various ways of attacking these problems as they come up. As the design documents are written, their contractor is going to figure that out. And he's got responsibility under his contract to do that. And we're not being included in that the way it's written. So if we identify those places, which Jamie has already done, and said, you know, when these events occur and these choices need to be made, they'll be made in concert with us. Whatever the final result is, whatever the options are, we don't need to articulate or worry about, because if that event's triggered where somebody's going to be deciding what to do and what's best for the erosion control and those sorts of things, it'll trigger cooperating with the Wetlands Agency and doing it under our supervision.
Commissioner Basserman, yeah, I certainly see that. I guess what I'm wondering is where have we identified, maybe it's a list or maybe it's throughout the documents, where have we identified those points of communication?
Well, she's got two, Jamie, Commissioner Rose, she's found two. Maybe there are others, but, you know, as Commissioner Boda reminds me, you know, we want to step back and we're not trying to dictate what they're going to do. We're just trying to make sure they're not allowed to make choices with our blessing without getting our blessing.
Yeah, Commissioner Bassman. And therefore, what I was saying is if Jamie could identify, whether it's 2 or whether it's 5 or whatever, those points, put that in a document that we would then review when we meet again next week or the week after.
And I Commissioner Rose again, and I think that solution is that general conditions document that's is being drafted, because this is going to be a common thing that applies to every project. There are these kinds of circumstances, and I think if you come up with the right blanket and put it in that generic document that will go with this permit and every permit, you'll solve the problem.
Commissioner Bassman, got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I would second that. I think that the examples that have been found and described, I think are enough to serve as examples of what the rule is, right? And then that rule may be put in as a condition, and in the instance where similar situations like that are discovered, they need to be remedied, and that would be part of the permit as a condition. So, and then I think that it's a good idea to take that, whatever that language ends up being, and add it to our list of boilerplate, so that in these larger applications where there's inconsistencies, that can be remedied through the permitting process.
Okay.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. Conditions are absolutely a great way of making sure an approval is minor changes are made, but I just want to make sure that commissioners are also keeping in mind that, you know, an approval should not be reliant upon the conditions. So absolutely, we always, or a lot of times, particularly on large applications, the commission has conditions, and they're a great way of making sure that the details that the commission thinks is important are addressed.
This is Commissioner Boda.
My point,
I don't think that this is a substantive change. I think that this condition really speaks to a logistical issue within the hundreds of pages of documents that have been included in the application. So I think where we're talking about substantive changes, then that guidance applies. I think in this case, this is a logistical issue of ensuring that things match. When somebody edited something in one place and they didn't edit in another, we just want to make sure that the documentation is all lined up.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. Thank you, Suzanne, for clarifying the content of my comment.
Any other discussion regarding this application? Jamie, do we have sufficient, Commissioner Basserman, Jamie, do we have sufficient information and clarity to provide a document to be delivered to the commissioners at the next special meeting on this application for us to then make a decision?
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, I think we should kind of briefly touch on the boilerplate conditions. If particularly condition 16 we already talked about. It sounds like the monitoring condition, you want to add that and add some language that speaks to possibly continuing it past the 5 years. Are there any other conditions such as an erosion control bond that you want to consider for this application?
For Commissioner Basserman, for applications of this size, do we normally include that bond?
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, I think that would be fair to say.
Commissioner Boda, I agree. We have a history of using bonds for application of this size, both for stormwater, sediment erosion control, and for planting plans.
Commissioner Basserman, do we have enough history with establishing those bonds that we can effectively indicate a price?
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. So generally the condition has language that allows that the amount to be determined at a later date. So that's not actually in our draft boilerplate conditions, but usually there's language along the lines of applicant shall submit an estimate for review by town staff, and we'll review it and see if it makes some level of sense to market price values. Sometimes we'll ask engineering or other departments that might have relevant information to review it and provide comment. And then staff would approve the amount based on the estimate provided or ask for additional information.
This Commissioner Rose, you know, I always find on the other side of the table, we always get a chuckle out of how much towns want bonds, and we all laugh about how little the bonds are that they want. At the end of the day, there's no way to price a bond. A bond is for self-help. The contractor falls down on his face, we call the bond, we get the work done, and we pay for it. And if our general conditions don't set out a process for calling a bond under what circumstances and what it can be used for, you're going to end up in the middle of a war anyway, and you won't have a bond and you won't get anything done. So I haven't looked at historically what we've done with the events that would call into play the bonding company, utilizing that, taking control of the site, executing that work at the contractor's expense. But that needs to be part and parcel of asking for bonds. The second thing is that to just come up with some number, I guarantee you it's going to be a fraction of what we think on the construction side is reasonable, because we know all the stuff that can go wrong and what it's really going to cost us to fix it if it did. And so on the one hand, you want to establish your right to require a bond. I would argue that it would be more worthwhile to talk about the circumstances you can see within the four corners of the project. What kinds of events would impact the town or wetland resources and so forth and so on that would trigger a bond, and that would give you the right to establish a value for that bond and obligate that contractor to put up that bond on demand when that event occurs. Because whatever you're going to do today isn't going to match with the event that's going to take place. And the bond that you're going to have is probably going to be inadequate. It's better to have a process that allows you to react to a circumstance, identify the real potential cost, get that bond in place, and likewise, you have the triggers in that event having already occurred for stepping in and self-helping to get it ultimately resolved.
This is Commissioner Boda. Commissioner Rose, can you clarify? It sounds to me as though you are suggesting that that there not be a bond amount articulated, but rather a description of events or criteria that would require the applicant to give an estimate, and then in the event that certain things occur, and that then they would have to put up that money for the bond when that incident occurred. I'm a little confused by that.
So it's one of those things where there's 50 ways to skin the cat. You can, on the one hand, require a bond of some, substantive amount, but doing so is a primer, and the agency would have the ability during when events occur to modify that bond amount on demand when something happens that would exceed the bond you started with. So you could take that approach, have a bond, we all feel better, we've got one, but we have language that allows you to react to circumstances. Give you Gould Lane's an example. So, you're building a bunch of houses, they're not complicated, this isn't a big deal. And then the contractor, unbeknownst to anybody, clears the entire site, strips it all, and in one event, erosion into the wetlands is to such an extreme. In my opinion, they're looking at tens of thousands of dollars, maybe $50,000 to $100,000 in mitigation costs or cleanup costs in that one event. We never would have come up with that number at the beginning. We wouldn't even have come up with that screw up as a basis for a bond. So I'm just saying, be more circumspect about the real need for a bond and how you can adapt to circumstances when the events occur. In other words, it's not a one-time shot. Try to guess a good number, get it, and you're done. Because you might end up with a bond that's so wholly inadequate, you've accomplished nothing. The town's not going to be able to do anything. The RTM would have to approve money beyond the bond that would be too small in any event. And so it's really about accomplishing something. So again, you could 50 ways to do this, but if you want skin in the game, you ask for a bond, fix the number, but put in our general conditions or our boilerplate and in our conditions of approval that we, the agency can increase the bond at will by the addition of another bond based on circumstances that occur in the future.
Commissioner Boda, have you seen towns do that?
Yes.
That's not something that we've ever done.
No, again, truly, we chuckle about these things, when we're on the side waiting to see what happens. And we know the bond is going to come, and then they tell us that they want a bond for $10,000, and we're like, oh, God, that's great. We thought it was going to be $1 million. It's impossible to bond what might happen. So I'm just telling you, I could not give you a document that say, here's a project we bid on, they did it this way. So that's really the question you're asking, and I don't have an answer. But I think conceptually, the town attorney could certainly comment on what I'm suggesting as a process so that we can really end up with bonding that's meaningful and can in fact address the potential things that happen.
Jamie Frederick, inland wetland agent. I'm not familiar with having implemented a practice like that in the past. I think that without getting into specifics of any sites, ideally you're monitoring the site and you're making sure that they're complying with the terms of the permit, and the permit adequately, or the plan that was approved in the permit is adequately designed to prevent issues, and you're catching things before they become catastrophic. I also understand though that oftentimes, bond amounts aren't necessarily what you hope they are. I'm also not familiar with a bond being pulled in the 5 years that I've worked for the town, from inland wetlands. But I also didn't work in this department for just over a year. So, but if the commission's interested in, getting town council's opinion on that, we can certainly ask.
This is
Sorry to-
Commissioner Boda. I know that we've pulled at least 2 bonds, and one of them off of Piscatella, which was a mess, and then another one was for plantings that weren't done following the 85%, but I don't remember where that was. So I would be curious about what it would look like to incorporate language that Commissioner Rose is talking about, and if something like that has been done in other towns. I think it's well intentioned. I think it's worth looking into. I think that we have other mechanisms by which, if there is a problem, that we could seek recourse prior to pulling a bond. I mean, the ideal would be that we never have to pull the bond, right? That through the mechanisms, the original contractor, developer deals with the problem well before we ever think about using a bond. And that's really the last resort.
It's the same reason we all buy insurance policies. We don't want any of that to happen, but it will. I'll see what I can come up with, by the way.
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. Commissioner Boda, just to clarify, it was discussed having a bond for the wetland mitigation plantings, the erosion controls, and I think you might have mentioned stormwater. Did you want the bond to cover anything regarding the stormwater as well, or, and if so, I think we have some boilerplate language that I can look into adding. I think that's more of a, is the stormwater something you were looking to bond as well, have bonded as well?
Commissioner Boda, I think that, and maybe it would go under the sediment and erosion control more than the stormwater systems, because it's really about the maintenance of those and ensuring that we don't have sediment moving off-site when it should be in temporary sediment traps or any other part of the stormwater system.
Jamie, Commissioner Basserman, the boilerplate, in our discussions prior to today's meeting, the boilerplate is actually a collection of not only Brantford, but other towns as well, boilerplate conditions. Is that correct?
Jamie Frederick, Inland Wetland Agent. Yes, so the boilerplate document is a draft. It was a document that was compiled from a couple different towns, and not all of it hasn't had a chance to really be looked over in the language fine-tuned. So all of the conditions in there require further review, which is part of why it's important for the commission to deliberate and then staff to write up a document and then have the commission review and make any modifications and approve as necessary. So that there's a lot of language in here that needs to be cleaned up before it's really put in a permit. Some of it's more food for thought than necessarily actually well thought out wording and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a springboard for discussion, I would say.
Commissioner Basserman, and so that raises the question in my mind of, since it's, I believe, a 5-page document, we've identified a couple areas that we want to incorporate within this particular application. It is also now 11:15. Are we at a point where we need to reconvene these deliberations with the idea of having to go through that boilerplate, picking out those that may be appropriate, rejecting those that we feel are inappropriate, before we can really consider, a final deliberation?
I would say yes, Commissioner Rose.
Any other commissioner want to weigh in?
Commissioner Boda, I think that makes sense. I think that staff can start to create a draft based on the conversation tonight, and then we can continue to look at these boilerplate items and talk about which ones we want and which ones we don't.
If that's a course of action that the commission feels appropriate, the other thing we have to do then is make sure that staff has enough time to bring about a document and then schedule a date where we can review that, which would also be a virtual meeting. Staff, how much time, back Commissioner Basserman, how much time do you think you need to prepare the document with what you have today?
Jamie Frederick, in the Wetland Agent. I would say a week would be good. We're not open tomorrow. So we would be starting on Monday, and I would send it probably to town council for initial comment. So I guess I would also ask to clarify, what are you looking for me to draft? Are you looking for me to draft a resolution of approval with the conditions as discussed, or are you looking for just a draft of the conditions that were discussed, or?
I think at this point, it would be worthwhile to draft a document that had the appropriate boilerplate conditions that you felt were applicable, taking tonight's discussion in terms of whether it's conditions or concerns or whatever, and add that to the document, and then a draft up of what we went through with 10.2. And then we will discuss in total that at our next meeting.
Okay, I think I follow. Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent.
So if next week it's gonna, by the time you get back and get going on Monday and get town council and review the recording, etc., we're probably into then 2 weeks in that week, which would be
23rd is Commissioner Boda.
Let's see.
So next week is the 16th. The Thursday is the 16th. The Thursday after is April 23rd.
23rd, day after Earth Day. Yeah, does Thursday work for all the commissioners? Yeah.
Commissioner Boda, yes.
Steve Sullivan, yes.
Eric Rose, yes.
The suggestion is, and I guess 7 o'clock, although did we do the last one at 6? The special meeting? No, we did it at 7, right? So 7, no, we did it at 6. The Zoom meeting. Does 6 work for people or no? Does 6 o'clock work on the 23rd of April? We're probably still, quarantined at that point, so.
May 20th now.
So Commissioner Boda, I think I would be amenable to 6 if it did not mean that we had an additional hour to deliberate and still end at 11 p.m. If we're going to still end at 11, I'd rather start at 7 and have a reasonable dinner time.
That's pretty reasonable. All right, can we do it at 6, folks? And we got a little daylight as a bonus.
On the 23rd.
On the 23rd, which is a special meeting. The only subject of that special meeting at this point would be to the deliberations associated with 1151 West Main Street. And at that point, well, would it be appropriate to email that document out to the commission prior to the meeting for a review, Jamie, or are we not supposed to do that?
Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent. I believe we could do that. We would also be putting it online to satisfy the remote meeting requirements, so it would be accessible to anyone that was interested in attending the meeting.
Commissioner Bassett, yes, the Commissioner Boda's point, if we could review that ahead of time and have some opinions as to its content, it might help us get through the information more quickly.
Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent. Yeah, I think it would just be like a draft document kind of highlighting the different sections of concerns, kind of more like notes, if you will, for consideration to help guide the conversation rather than, it doesn't sound like you're ready for like a draft resolution at this point. Does that sound accurate?
Commissioner Bassman, that's kind of where I'm at. Any other commissioner feel differently? Okay.
Right. Jamie Frederick and the Wetland Agent. The other thing, Peter, is by continuing it, you've got 2 options. One, you can ask the applicant for an extension, or the commission can apply Executive Order 7B.
Yeah, at this point in time, if the applicant is still part of the conversation here, I think given the discussion tonight, the commission feels that it'd be appropriate to review everything kind of with a fresh set of eyes and ears on the 23rd, which is kind of 2 weeks from today. And in doing so, I think we get a better result of discussion. I need, I guess, to hear from the applicant as to whether an extension is granted. Hearing none.
The sleep.
Hearing none. I'm going to invoke Executive Order 7B, which says that we have the opportunity to review on the 23rd.
So it's Executive Order 7B, 7.
Oh, wait.
I Part 19A.
I'm still here.
He's
So,
here.
Oh, you are.
yes, I'm still here. So,
Back to square one. I'm looking
not
for
on video, but on audio, yes, I will grant the extension.
Thank
Jamie
you very
Frederick
much.
and the Wetland Agent. John, can you send me an email confirming that?
Yeah, I'll be around tomorrow, but I will make sure I send it no later than Monday.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on our agenda, we have a number of items under enforcement, other business, agent approvals, and some correspondence and announcements,
Chairman Basserman.
which I guess I would like to move till the next meeting. Yes.
Chairman,
Yes, Mr.
Oh,
McCarthy.
Jamie
sorry.
Frederick and the Wetland Agent. David has a comment.
Yes.
Thank you, Jamie. This is David McCarthy speaking. Before we leave the deliberations, I wanted to ask for clarification on 2 things. One, I'm sure I can capture in the minutes, but sometimes or in the recording, but sometimes I've leaned on that and it's failed me. So can you reiterate what it is you'd like us to draft up? I captured some of it, but I wasn't able to grab all of it. And my second point is we kind of softly set the meeting date. I don't think it was confirmed. And also, I believe, I could be wrong, but Jamie, correct me if we have to announce that it's a telemeeting versus where it normally would be located.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent. Since it's deliberations and not a public hearing, I don't think we have to worry about the location, but I think that you and I, David, can work out with the recording and ourselves what it is they're looking for, rather than going through it again in the interest of time. And so to clarify, the deliberations for IW 1911-01 are going to be continued to a special meeting that will be held remotely on April 23rd, 2020 at 6 p.m. Is that correct, Peter?
Commissioner Basserman, that's correct.
So moving on to the enforcement and other business, those items are already to be tabled. Does the commission want to table those items to the special meeting or to the May meeting?
Speaking for myself, I think Commissioner Basserman, I think the May meeting would be sufficient. Is there anything in 7 or 8 enforcement and other business that has a time sensitive point to it that we need to deal with at the special meeting? If there are none, then I would suggest that everything move to May.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, a lot of the violations require a planting plan, and we are approaching the planting season. May is kind of getting towards the end of it. But at the same time, I don't know what everyone's day-to-day life looks like right now. And so I think that's really up to you, which is why I put the question to you guys, whether you want to try and address it at the special meeting or just wait until May.
Commissioner Basserman, the other thing is with the environment that we're in with 6 degrees of separation and all that other kind of stuff, I'm not sure when this planting plan can really get going. So unless we're aware that there is a real time sensitive issue, I make a motion that all the 7 and 8 get moved to the normal regularly scheduled May meeting.
Commissioner Boda, I'd second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Regarding agent approvals, no reason why, I guess we need to go over that now.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent, the 3 agent approvals, 63 Gould Lane, 16 Sybil Creek Place, 57 and 61 East Industrial Road, those all came to the commission and based on certain criteria set forth, were approved. So you've already heard them all before.
At this point, at 11 o'clock.
Correspondence and announcements. I'd like to just get this stuff off the table if I can.
Okay, dear.
It's all in the Dropbox. You all have access to it. If you have any questions or if you want anything to be carried over to the next meeting, please let staff know so that we can do so. Does that work for everyone?
Yes.
Sure, it does.
Jamie, Commissioner Rose, on Dropbox, we don't use it a lot. We have an internal system that we rely on in business. And so what I've realized why I couldn't see documents that you thought were there is I had downloaded your Dropbox to our Dropbox. And obviously when I downloaded it was before you put other stuff in it. Don't you have the ability to share your drop boxes with the commissioner specifically so that we're in effect always in sync rather than relying on downloading them and then finding out that I'm not in sync?
In the wetland, Jamie Frederick. I think the problem with that might be the amount of space that our Dropbox is. So if you don't have a business account, you're probably not gonna have enough space. Also, but we can look into that.
Yeah, okay.
But I know that
Speaking
have
for
to-
myself, we have plenty of space. It just, it's a question of whether you have it for offline purposes or it remains in sync. And I don't know if Dropbox can even do that, but if it's possible, that's why I couldn't see things tonight. Because when I downloaded the Dropbox to tonight's meeting, you would put things in between.
Jamie Frederick and the wetland agent noted, and we'll see if there's anything we can do. I'm not sure though. You might have to access it live for the latest information.
Got it.
Commissioner Basserman, I thank you all for your participation tonight. It was a good 4 hours of concentrated discussion. We will adjourn again when we convene on the 23rd at 6 o'clock. And I'll now entertain a motion for adjournment.
Commissioner Boda, so moved.
And I'm sure there's a second out there.
Commissioner Rose, second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
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 Good night. Happy Easter, Passover, whatever. Take
Bye
care.
all.
Good evening.
Aye.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Brantford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BrantfordTV.org.